Okay, I have the live stream going to YouTube and we are good to go.
Thanks, Chief. Good morning. Welcome to the 589th board meeting of the California Central Water Quality Control Board, Reading City Hall. I'm Mark Bradford, Chair of the Central Valley Water Board. I will introduce the other board members in just 1 minute. People who want to listen to or watch the meeting online, or its customary webcast is available. You're receiving presentations and public comments here at the meeting and online through the Zoom meeting platform. If you are here at the meeting and intend to present or comment, or think you might be interested in commenting, you should have filled out a speaker comment card, blue card available at the board's chambers entrance. If you are online and planning on commenting, you should already be in the Zoom meeting room using the meeting ID and password provided by board staff. If you have not already received this information, email us now at agenda5@waterboards.ca.gov and add email address is agenda followed by the number 5 with no space at waterboards.ca.gov. Speaker comment in the subject line so we can follow up. Those in the Zoom meeting, you will be on mute and your camera turned off until it is your turn to speak. Our meeting host will then unmute you and ask you to turn on your camera at the tablet. When you are done speaking and the board members completed asking questions, you are placed on mute and your camera turned off. I will now introduce the other board members as follows. Nick Avdis of Sacramento. Denise Cadera of Allensworth, who's participating online. Alina Lee Reeder of Sacramento, also participating online. Sean Yang of Sacramento. And again, I am Mark Bradford, also Sacramento. Nicole Morgan, the State Water Board member liaison, is participating at this meeting and will provide an update a little later. In case anybody needs help with the restrooms, they are outside the board chambers at the left. I will now introduce Executive Officer Patrick Palupa, introduce his staff.
Good morning, and thanks to everybody at the city and county Shasta and here in Reading that has made this event possible. I really do love getting up to this part of the region. My name is Patrick Palupa, Executive Officer of the Central Valley Water Board. To my immediate right is Jessica Yar, Senior Staff Counsel from the Office of Chief Counsel. And then sitting across from me, I'll go from left to right. We have Clint Snyder, the Assistant Executive Officer who runs our Reading office. JJ Baum, Assistant Executive Officer in our Rancho Cordova office. And it's my pleasure to introduce Christina Shoup, who's the newly appointed Assistant Executive Officer who is now in charge of our Fresno office. To her left is Kennedy Knight from the Office of Chief Counsel, and then Adam Lapitz from the Rancho Cordova office, Assistant Executive Officer. Immediately in front of me is Mindy Maxwell, clerk to the board, and our assistant, and a number of staff in the audience. I believe online we also have Chris Moskal from the Office of Chief Counsel. You.
Thanks,
Morning.
That's Chris. Hi, Chris. Okay, we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance now and I'll read it. Board communications, are there any activities any of the board members would like to report on since the last meeting? Denise, Denise, can you hear us?
Looks like we may have lost Denise. I don't see her on the list right now.
Please, can we pause just for a minute? See if we can reconnect with Denise.
He's still MIAG.
She is, yes.
Okay, we'll move on, and then if she gets back online, we can back up.
And Jean, can you verify that Elena is on?
Hi, I have a couple items to report out. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. On September 11th, I met with the Save the River Association regarding the Lower American River Bacteria Study. And October 2nd through the 4th, I attended the 2023 National Waterways Conference annual meeting in Sacramento. Thanks.
Thanks, Elena. And I participated in a call with the regional board chairs, and the main topic was integrated regulatory water management with a focus on desal and permitting processes that will be streamlined for desalination. After a needs assessment, comparing that option to recycling, environmental justice, energy, tribal interaction, a number of issues were discussed. That's all I have on my end. Sean has one.
Good morning. Also want to report out that October 5th, I spoke on the phone with Long Zhang, who's a executive director for Asian Business Institution and Resource Center. Also, USDA State Executive Director for Farm Service Agency of California, about the small farmers and farmers in general in the Fresno County and what do they need, and follow up on the meet and greet we had a year ago or so. And I thought it was a pretty productive conversation.
Ms.
Thank you.
Kadarna has rejoined us.
Yes.
Yes, I'm here. Where are we now on the agenda? I've had technical difficulties this morning, unfortunately.
We're right at the spot where you tell us what you've been doing for the last 2 months.
Oh, wow. That's interesting. Okay. Let me. Okay. 15th of August, I participated in a SGMA review, achieving groundwater access for all. It was a visual data tool demonstration. On the 24th of August, I participated in a community water leaders network roundtable. And the 13th of September, I joined the Leadership Council Justice and Accountability Climate Resiliency Bond webinar. The 15th of September, I attended the State Water Board Regional Water Sewer Utility meeting. This was with Andrew Antivalt and Chad Fisher overseeing the SAFER program. Dr. Longley was in that meeting, also State Board member Laurel Firestone, addressing the concerns of water, utility services, actually water, wastewater, stormwater, looking at a regional approach of how we can address those matters. Then on 27th of September, we had the Schaefer team, Chad Fisher, again, Andrew Antivalt was here, and 16 members from the SAFER program from across the state came to Allensworth to get a tour. And we were able to share with them information regarding our programming and learn more about the SAFER program. And I think that's all I have. Lastly, on October 3rd, I attended the Community Water Center annual celebration. So that's my update for today, and sorry for the technical difficulties I was having on this end.
Timing was actually great. Thanks, Denise.
Okay.
Okay. Move on to agenda item 3, which is State Water Board liaisons. Nicole Morgan.
I don't see Nicole on the call.
He's here live, G.
Thanks.
Good morning, Chair Bradford and members of the board. Happy to be here this morning to provide a liaison report. So as usual, there's a lot going on with the state board. One is just start off with just our communication department is been busy this year, providing a lot of media releases. And so I'm going to start sharing some of those with you all, providing you links to those and just letting you know just widely just what is happening throughout the state and with the state water board and our programs. So just to highlight a couple, on September 14th, there was one just letting everyone know just what the Division of Financial Assistance is doing to advance water resilience and safe drinking water through 1.2 billion in financial assistance. And so, just a great effort that is going on there. So a lot more to do. Just wanted to highlight, that is one of the programs that isn't talked about as much because it's not one of our regulatory programs, but just want to highlight more what the Division of Financial Assistance does. And then on September 19th, the board ordered Blue Trident to cease unauthorized diversions in San Bernardino Mountains. On September 28th, the state board initiated public process for the Bay Delta updates. And, I'm sure that's something that you guys are following. And so another item that was just heard at the state board on September 20th, the state board issued an order remanding the Central Coast Water Board's general waste discharge requirements for discharges from irrigated lands. It's also known as Ag Order 4.0 to make revisions consistent with certain presidential requirements of the state board's Eastern San Joaquin order. And so, that's the order that is for Region 5, and to uphold other provisions, Ag Order 4.0. I know that's another order that you are all, following closely. So making water conservation a way of life and water use efficiency. So formal rulemaking began on this regulation on October 18th, not October, let's try August 18th. And so state board staff held a public hearing on October 4th. This first public comment period is open until October 17th. The hearing will include an overview of the proposed regulation, regulatory timeline, process, and presentations from interested parties. And so we got a lot of feedback during the hearing. We're getting a lot of the comment letters in, take a look at that, and we'll continue through the process, which is a year-long process. So the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund Expenditure Plan. So this is a plan that is updated annually to basically to where Division of Financial Assistance lays out how they'll be expending the funds over the year. So also on October 3rd at our state board meeting, we adopted the fiscal year plan. The fund provides up to $130 million a year to develop and implement solutions for domestic wells and water systems that are not sustainable or have violations of drinking water standards. The fund generally prioritizes small disadvantaged communities or low-income households. And so it's also informed by the annual drinking water needs assessment. And so the needs assessment was released in May 2020. 23. And so each year the needs assessment occurs and then the fund then takes a look at that and then is developed and then is brought to the board for consideration. So let's see here. So water and wastewater arrearage payment program. So it was extended. We, again, on October 3rd, adopted new guidelines for an extended program. So this time, the program will provide up to $600 million in payments for both water and wastewater customers, arrearages for a relief period from March 4th, 2020 through December 31st, 2022. State Board staff will provide an application project package to all eligible applicants, establish an online portal for submittal of applications, and provide 60 days to receive applications. All community water systems, wastewater treatment providers, and wastewater billing entities, whether they participate in the original programs or not, are eligible to apply. There's an FAQ on the program website. And so please, reach out to us if you have any questions about that program. Want to make sure that we are getting funds out to all that are eligible. And so again, update to the Sacramento, San Joaquin Bay Delta Water Quality Control Plan. As part of the public process required to update and implement the plan, the state board released a draft staff report on September 28th that evaluated environmental and related effects of in-stream flows and other potential changes to the Sacramento Delta component of the plan. So there's a multi-day series of in-person virtual workshops that planned for November and December, with a robust public comment period that concludes on December 15th. So also the state board staff are also continuing to implement the water supply strategy. There's several actions that are laid out through that for various divisions. And so we will be having an update on the first year progress at an upcoming board meeting. So once that happens, I will be happy to provide an overview of all of the activities that happened over the first year. So I'm here if there are any questions.
Yes, board member Morgan, I just wanted to raise the question or the concern regarding funding. I know you mentioned the Division of Financial Assistance. I know there's the SAFER program. A lot of programs are being launched. A lot of funding is out there. We have teams doing work. But my main concern is that the monies for years get held up and they don't get delivered to the communities that need the service. The disadvantaged communities, everybody talks about the disadvantaged communities, the smaller communities. And so my concern is that how do we move beyond this point to ensure that these monies are getting into the program? Sometimes it might be fish and wildlife. Sometimes it might be federal fish and wildlife. Sometimes it might be any other environmental issue. But the bottom line is, while all of these funds are available and while we have all the staff and wherever the hiccups come, we still have communities that have problems with water supply, water shortage, and many are without water. When I go to, like I said, I participate in the Community Water Leaders Network, and I hear about communities like Orosi, where they've been without water for 2 years and their wells are dry. I mean, the money is there, but it doesn't do any good if it's not getting to where the communities are. I guess I'm just continuing to advocate and express the frustration that many of these communities I hear from all the time regarding the problems with the lack of water and when is it coming? When is the program going to be here? We have communities that have people waiting to get connected to a water system, and they can't get connected to a water system because they have an old water system and they've been waiting for 13 years. Money has been in the coffers for the communities, but they don't have the system to operate yet. The problem continues. I'm just expressing the frustration. Mainly, that's what I'm doing. Thank you for listening.
Thank you, Board Member Kadar. I share many of your concerns, and yes, there has been a delay. We continue to take a look at all of our programs, and look at ways to I'm going to say streamline, but yes, so streamline our programs internally at the State Water Board. One that we did, I believe it was earlier this year, the expedited programs, make sure that we're getting money there quicker. And yes, even if we can get money there quicker, there are sometimes other delays. So we're taking a look at all of those and looking at other ways to, whether it's new TA programs to where we can get over some of those hurdles quicker, and really do appreciate the continued feedback. That is, without that continued feedback and understanding of what those delays are, we wouldn't be able to continue to look for ways to overcome those more. And so many times it's not just a one-time delay. It is happening to multiple systems. And we have to continue to gather that data, understand what those multiple delays are so that we can continue to advance our programs to make sure that we aren't continuing to have those delays, to be, frank about it. Just make sure that we are getting the money out and the projects are moving forward, and making sure we have the metrics in place so that we can see, are our programs working the way that they should. So appreciate your continued feedback and advocacy in this area. It truly is appreciated and needed.
My last comment is bottled water, plastic water bottles. It's not an option. It's not a viable option. It's hurting the environment. Many people, when they run out of bottled water, they cannot even afford to go buy water. So they're drinking contaminated water. So I'm just looking for things to move forward in a positive way, that where the communities can begin to see, well, the state is giving me all this money, but we don't have a project yet. We're still dealing with the same situation. I'm waiting to be able to report back and let people know or hear from them that the water system is working, and we finally have safe drinking water. It's the lifeline. It's the local resource that communities need. And because you're in a disadvantaged community doesn't mean you need to suffer through what many of these communities continuously have to face on a daily basis. So thank you for your feedback, and hopefully we can see some progress happening.
Any more questions? Been very busy, Nicole, and the whole board has been. So thanks for your update. See you next time in Sacramento. Did want to give a shout out. I forgot to do this at the beginning, to the folks who put together our field trip yesterday with the Upper Pitt River, and talking to a lot of the ranchers and the farmers in that area about the irrigated land program requirements. It was a spectacular day, lucky with the weather, and just a really impressive field trip. And the tribal input, yeah, that was very interesting. We had a member of the Pitt River tribe that gave us an overview of the Pitt River and what its significance is culturally to that tribe. So again, it was a great day. Thank you. Sure.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that up, Chair. I just wanted to reiterate, recognize and acknowledge the folks, including the tribal representatives and members from the agricultural community. It was a large group, and it was a great conversation with stakeholders, and certainly I encourage, furthering that dialogue with our tribal representatives as well as representatives of the ag community. There are obviously issues that continue to need attention from this board, and I look forward to those additional conversations. So thanks to everybody for organizing and attending yesterday.
Just want to piggyback on that my feelings are mutual with my colleagues. I just want to add that these rancher farmers, they are very passionate and carry on. their generations of farmers in their family, and they're hurting in some years more than others, and definitely whatever we could do to ease up those struggles. I hope that we will come to those conversation and provide some sort of solution if it can be. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Moving on to the public forum agenda item 4. If you're a person in the meeting and wish to speak, but have not submitted a speaker card, please fill one out on the table in front of the board chambers. If you're in the Zoom platform and have not already emailed us, but would like to speak during public forum, please raise your hand now. Has anybody submitted a request to speak on any topic which is not on the agenda today?
Laura Rosenberger Hader and or Ron Martin representing Fresnans against fracking wish to comment.
I do not see either on the call.
I believe it's the phone number, Gene.
There was one earlier. I don't see it currently. Neither of those folks are in the call, I believe.
On then, thank you. And item 5 is the executive officer's report. Prior to each meeting, the executive officer works with the executive assistant and the board's program managers to compile a report on the status of the board's programs, its staffing, and many different initiatives the board is working on. If you're a person in the meeting, again, and have not submitted a speaker card yet, please fill one out at the table in the front of the chambers. At this time, the executive officer is available to take questions on this report.
Could certainly field any questions that you may have. Just a couple items. There's also an award to give out. One of the things I think was raised, and I had a conversation with a board member, Sean Yang, about both his engagement with the irrigated lands program, but also the fact that there are some significant items on the board's agenda coming up, including some of the issues involved with the mercury control program. And through my conversation with Sean, we as a representative and a member of the Asian American Pacific Islander community and a leader within that community, and recognizing that currently the board work group for basin planning that would ordinarily address those concerns is vacant due to Raji's departure and Carmen's departure. Sean volunteered to participate in that work group and begin some of the thoughts about conversations that we're going to have with Hmong farmers and fishermen in the Sacramento San Joaquin Delta. I also kind of want to flag that issue, even though Sean stepped up for that one. I think we should also at the December board meeting talk about board work groups and see how the assignments not necessarily can be changed, but there's a few vacancies. And we have been in conversations with the administration, who has been promising that we have more board members on the way. So I think December would be a great time to revisit the board work group assignments and hopefully have some new blood on the team that can help round out some of those work groups that are vacant or have a vacancy or two due to the fact that we've had some departures over the last few months. So just want to tee that up. A couple other things. We're going to get to the approval of last board meeting minutes relatively soon. The minutes process will be changing. So the State Water Board adopted essentially a standardized minutes that all of the regional boards except us have been using. And I just wanted to kind of discuss it with you first before let you know that we're going to be switching to the new minute format. It's much more stripped down than the minutes that we have been approving. Very, very kind of bare bones, with the thought that, rather than paraphrase what we've been doing, we can really just put the minutes together as just the action items for the board, recognizing that everything that the board does now is easily available on YouTube. So if you want to go back and find an agenda item, it's not, olden days, there was no video of the board meeting, so we had to go to the minutes, kind of revisit those minutes, see who talked. There would be name misspellings, and you couldn't quite quote somebody just right. But the good format these days is to go to the YouTube, and the minutes will be more a vehicle for just saying what happened, who voted, who made the motion, stuff like that. So just wanted to let you know about that, so you weren't caught off guard when you saw the minutes for this meeting in December, and say, hey, this is about a fifth as long as it usually was. That's the reason there. One more thing I just want to kind of switch to is we have in the state water board and the regional boards have switched to a new listserv. We've been cleaning up kind of the listservs for all of the actions that the board has been working on. Go to the board's kind of landing page, Central Valley Water Board's homepage, and in the upper right hand corner you'll see subscriptions, and you can kind of click on that. It's a new listserv delivery mechanism that we've got out there. You put in your email address, and and it'll kind of let you know what you can subscribe to. So upper right hand corner of that landing page, and on the blue bar at the top. And if you go there, you can subscribe to things like the basin planning website and get all the mailings from that. As they've cleaned out some of the old emails, it's getting a little bit more complicated now. Perfect. I got it right up on the screen right now. So you punch in your email, any particular item that you're interested in. You can see what the board is doing. We're using this a little bit more heavily than we were before to kind of push out notifications when we issue certain orders. A lot of the planning actions that we have on the back end, kind of changing how we're doing business a little bit. So I really recommend spending some time on that part of the website and click those buttons and get subscribed to the emails that we're sending out to publicize some of our actions. So that's some of the kind of administrative stuff. I can go into the award or answer some questions from the executive officer's report, whatever your pleasure is right now.
I just have one comment on the executive officer's report. No, nothing stood out except for to acknowledge the executive officer's report. And in reading it, I get a lot of information. I learned what's happened in the past couple of months. And I know a lot of work goes into preparing it. And so I just want to acknowledge that and acknowledge the work the staff does. It's great information to get up to speed on what our regional staff are doing during the course of the couple of months that we are not at the meetings. So I appreciate the work. I appreciate reviewing and reading the executive officer's report. So thank you, Patrick and staff.
Thanks so much, Denise. And I would be remiss not to also thank Mindy, who has every couple months, she herds the cats, make sure that every single program manager is putting their information into the executive officer's report. She manages up, make sure that I review it on time, get through and try and make sure there's no typos in that. And to a certain extent, try and streamline it as much as possible. Still clocking in a little over 50 pages, but there's a lot happening in our region. 42% of the surface area of the state of California. That's a lot of ground to cover. So that's why we probably can't get it down much more than what we have in terms of reporting back on what we're doing.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Patrick, I agree with everything Denise said. It's really informative and a great record of what's been going on. I had one question on the pesticide TMDLs. There were 5 phase 1 permittees. Yes, 4 of them submitted their baseline monitoring plans, but the city of Modesto didn't. And I'm wondering what's happened with that, or how did they?
Let's see, is Adam around? He's got the best information on that right now, but I think the answer is there's some delays, and we're working through to make sure that they get their report. He's nodding his head in agreement.
Okay, thank you, Patrick.
And certainly, certainly urban pesticides and pesticides in municipal waterways are a significant challenge. As you heard even from the growers the other day, very often when you see a pesticide exceedance in their surface water monitoring plans, it can be from a household. I think the pesticide registration requirements for the folks in the agricultural community are extraordinarily high. You really have to get certification, licensing. DPR and the local ag commissioners have done a great job about implementing that program. This speaks to the other component of that. That there's a lot of folks who will dust off their old stuff in the garage, and maybe it's a discontinued pesticide, and I confess I've got the same inclination as well. It's like, well, it says 1 ounce to a gallon, 10 ounces to a gallon must be 10 times as better, 10 times more effective. And so often that leads to issues within the urban waterways. And virtually every kind of major community that we have in the Central Valley is implementing some measure of outreach program, of monitoring, and that's what that speaks to. So we'll continue to talk about this. It's a very important program to us to keep our urban waterways safe. Adam, anything more to add there?
Just if you have any specific questions or you'd like me to follow up and get exact information of what's caused the delays and things like that, I'd be happy to do so.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay, so I will be presenting a Superior Accomplishment Award today. Sierra Collins, I think I see. There we go. Congratulations. And my computer would not be working today, but for Sierra kind of digging out some gear from the Reading office a couple days ago. The Central Valley Water Board's Reading office management team is pleased to select Sierra Collins for the Superior Accomplishment Award. Sierra is being recognized for her admirable performance as a seasonal clerk and important member of the Reading Administrative Support Unit. Reading Admin Unit contains two full-time positions and 2 part-time seasonal clerks. Its responsibilities vary, providing essential service to about 55 employees. The admin unit is a central component to the office's daily operations as it manages incoming phone calls, processing correspondence, permitting actions, board orders, including ADA compliance, vehicle maintenance, in-office IT assistance, the power cord that Sierra found for me, and a multitude of other tasks requested from staff and the management team. Sierra has been with the board since May of 2021, and since then has become an integral part of the team. Her work ethic and eagerness to help in any way she can is commendable. Sierra has taken the initiative to revise the office's ADA remediation training guide and created detailed instruction and examples for how to format and process documents properly and efficiently. She has aided in updating internal forms to make them more user-friendly and constructive to the document production system, has trained new staff on administrative procedures, handles all front desk office tasks when her peers are out of the office, and produces high-quality work products and is diligent in following established processes and procedures. She strives to seek out more advanced training opportunities to further her career goals and requests special projects that further assist the management team between her core seasonal clerk responsibilities. Sierra's noteworthy contributions and dedication to the Central Valley Water Board, along with her positive attitude and professionalism, are most appreciated. We are grateful to have her as an integral part of the Reading team. Congratulations, Sierra. I'll add kind of personally that, we've got 18 water quality programs, and I'm the executive sponsor to the administrative program. So I work directly with Kelly on her annual work plan and things like that, and taking a look at where there are vacancies and where there are things that need to be done. And there have been some significant vacancies both in the Rancho Cordova office and in the Fresno office that we've filled the big spots in the Rancho office just this past month, and working on filling the spots in the Fresno office. But it's the Reading team, and it's Sierra that has really stepped up, especially in this virtual environment. They're able to help out all 3 offices and have really helped strengthen the backbone of the entire admin unit. So we've come to rely on Reading in an outsized way, and I'm really appreciative, Sierra, the rest of the team here, the folks that have set up for this board meeting and made it happen, and Clint kind of working with that team. It's really, really an admirable.
You're taking a picture. I'd just like to comment, during the times that we've been dealing with the pandemic and working remotely and all of that, just to hear what the work that Sierra has done has really is a tremendous support for what we've had to deal with in the past few years. So complete congratulations for the acknowledgement of this award for her. Okay.
That I think we can move on.
Okay. And item 6 is consideration of the minutes from the previous meeting. August 10th. Are there any edits or corrections to the August meeting minutes?
I'll move approval of the minutes, and then we'll say, in terms of standardization, I welcome that. Took a lot of time and effort to put these minutes together, and frankly, you're right, it's on video, so look forward to that new format.
Second that.
Have a motion and a second. Call the roll.
Board Member Yang,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Lee Reader,
Aye.
Vice Chair Abdus,
Yes.
and Chair Bradford.
Yes. Okay. Scooting right along here on item 7 already. This is the uncontested calendar, time and place for a public hearing to consider uncontested items 14 through 18. 2 items were removed from the contested calendar to the consent calendar. That was item number 11, which was a cease and desist order for Germano Suarez Dairy number 1. And item number 13, revised waste discharge requirements for the city of Diduba. If you're in person at the meeting or on Zoom and wish to comment on any of these items that haven't submitted a speaker request, again, please fill out the blue card at the table in front of the chambers or raise your hand on Zoom. Mindy, has anyone submitted a request to comment on any of the uncontested items?
No.
And are there any late?
Mindy, I think we might have Brittany Johnson, who that's items 14 through 18.
Yes, I'm only here to answer questions if the board has any. Thank you.
That's- So no late revisions.
No late revisions.
Okay. So we get a motion in a second.
I'll move approval. Second that.
Call the roll.
Board Member Yang,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Lee Reader,
Aye.
Vice Chair Abdus,
Yes.
and Chair Bradford.
Yes. Hey,
And if I could, I think there's one more set of waste discharge requirements. I don't know if there's anybody here to contest those items. It's the premier WDRs. That's item 12, I believe. We could move ahead with those before the 2 information items, unless there's somebody here to contest them.
Nobody online or on the phone, nobody in the room. Not.
Separate.
It would be a separate motion
Yeah.
and second on for agenda item 12 to
Okay, let's jump.
move forward with the WDRs based on the staff report and proposed order.
Yeah, I'll move the item number 12. I know there was a
Oh,
lot of,
hold on just a second. Sorry. We do have some late revisions on
Oh.
item 12 that I do need to
please.
include. So we did make a few small changes to the WDR to clarify when the permit is effective. So the first one is on page 16 of the WDR, in the first sentence of the paragraph beginning with "it is hereby ordered." We will delete the word "conditionally." And then after that sentence, we're going to add a new sentence that says the date of the final determination shall constitute the effective date of the permit. And then the second change is a global change in the permit to change all deadlines from the adoption date to the effective date to follow that.
Okay, I want to acknowledge the amount of work. I know it was a squirrely one, so glad it's brought to its logical conclusion here. So I will move the item
Second that.
With the late revisions.
with the late revision, yes.
Second that.
Hey, can you call the roll?
Board Member Yang,
Yes.
Board Member Kadara,
Yes.
Board Member Lee Reader,
Aye.
Vice Chair Abdus.
Yes,
And Chair Bradford.
Yes. I wasn't confident to get through that one so quick, so that's good news. Thanks, Jessica.
We can move to 8, the proposed meeting dates for 2024.
Proposed meeting dates for 2024 are 15-16 February, 18-19 April, which will be held in Fresno. We're expecting a pretty good time down state. June 2021, August 22, 23. We'll be back in Reading on the 17th and 18th of October next year. And the final meeting will be 12, 13, 7. As noted above, any meeting I didn't mention will be held in Greenwich. Proposed dates work for the board. And any suggested revisions?
My only comment would be, if we could, only move the February date if absolutely necessary. Some notices have gone out already with that time frame, and we're actually planning a very extensive racial equity training for most of the managers at the regional board the week before. So certainly at the board's pleasure to move that February date if need be, but I would only do so very reluctantly.
We all had a chance to look at these dates before the meeting, so.
yeah. But yeah, I'm okay. The only comment is on February 16th. I may have a conflict, so just kind of a early flag on that for me, but I don't. So I'm good with it.
Yeah, I don't have any problems with those dates either. Hopefully there's an opportunity for the Fresno trip to do a tour. I'm not sure what or where, but there's always something to see here in the Central Valley.
I think we can absolutely work to accommodate a tour. I look forward to it.
Thank you.
Thank you both. All right, I think we're set on those dates. Now we're going to move into some informational items, which I'm always interested to hear about, especially up here in Reading regarding forest activities.
We need a make a motion.
No, we don't have, okay. Angela, we're going to hear an update on the forest activities program. It's an information item only and no action will be taken, although the board may ask questions, provide direction to staff. Following the staff presentation, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address the board. Angela.
Morning, Chair Bradford and board members. Angela Wilson. I'm a supervising engineer and geologist in the board's Reading office and the Forest Activities Program Manager. I'm here today with informational item number 9. And sorry, Jean, got ahead of you. Please advance. Next. I'm joined today by several other presenters that are going to introduce themselves as their turn comes. My suspicion is they're probably all regretting the how to delegate classes I took this year. So here they are with me. So we're going to start by providing a brief refresher on the forestry program, the 3 main components that make up the program. That's forest practice. Sorry, Jean, I'm getting ahead again. Next, thank you. Forest practice, utility corridor management, and federal lands. Then we'll cover several additional wildfire related topics and some of the projects that we think you're going to find interesting. Next. So I'm going to start by talking about why the Water Board is interested in forest land management in California. So interested that we have an entire program focused on activities occurring in our forested lands. Scale is one of those reasons. So if California is roughly 100 million acres, approximately 36 million are forested. They're primarily distributed across the central and northern portions of the state, as you see in this map, and private lands in orange and public lands in green. Further divided by ownership, we have about 13 million-ish in private and state lands and about 23 million in federal ownership. Next. Sorry, I'll get it. Right. Within the Central Valley region alone, we have about 16 million acres of forested lands where all kinds of different management activities occur and where much of our state's water is generated. Next. So just a quick summary of the type of land management activities that occur in our forest lands, along with the potential impacts that can be related to them. We have roads used to support forest management activities. They're usually non-paved, remote, located in mountainous terrain. They can be difficult to access and maintain. They tend to concentrate stormwater flows and can lead to significant sediment discharges to our forested headwaters. Watercourse crossings, when undersized, poorly placed, aligned, or maintained, or where road runoff concentrates over watercourse crossing fills, can lead to significant sediment discharges to surface waters. Hill slope disturbance created during management activities can lead to bare, unstable soils that can be mobilized by precipitation or runoff events, also leading to significant sediment discharges to surface waters. So you might have noticed a common theme here. But while erosion and sediment discharges are the primary concerns for water quality, pesticide applications, typically in the form of herbicides, can also result in discharges, both of the chemicals themselves, as well as increasing soil loss by interfering with regrowth of vegetation. Stream temperatures can be increased by the removal of shade-producing canopy near the stream zones. And incidental petroleum discharges can also occur where heavy equipment is used in our forests. Next. While forest management activities can have negative impacts on water quality, I think it's also important to recognize that there are potential positive impacts. We get the opportunity to see restoration of poorly performing legacy roads and crossings, thus reducing erosion and sediment discharges. In some cases, we can see lowering of stream temperatures by returning the riparian zone to a better functioning condition. And we can see restoration of stretches of fish habitat that maybe have been cut off for decades by poorly designed or maintained crossings. And then sometimes we get to see wetland and meadow function that can be restored where conifer encroachment has occurred over time. Next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the first component of the program, which is our forest practice component. This is our commercial timber harvesting activities, an area of regulatory oversight that the water boards have been involved in since the 70s and was the start of the program at the water boards. Next. All right, the state passed the Forest Practice Act in 1973 to govern commercial timber harvesting activities on private and state-owned lands. The act was intended to ensure sustained production of wood products while protecting our natural resources. It also established the Board of Forestry. It required the promulgation of forest practice rules, and it assigned CAL FIRE as the CEQA lead agency and implementing and enforcing arm of those rules. The act also established a system of multi-agency review we call the review team. It's composed of CAL FIRE, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, California Geologic Survey, and the water boards. We all provide feedback to the CAL FIRE director on potential human safety and environmental impacts from proposed timber harvesting plans. Forest practice rules are essentially a set of standardized best management practices, prescriptive practices for operations that occur under an approved timber harvest plan. These BMPs, in addition to the multi-agency review team process and a public review component, all combine to create a process that's intended to be the functional equivalent of an EIR under CEQA. Next. So narrowing the scope just a little bit into the Central Valley region, about 50% of the timber harvested commercially in California comes from the Central Valley region, just private and state ownership lands. It's a pretty significant number. Next. And next. So bear with me for just a little bit more dry stuff. The Forest Practice Act, from the Forest Practice Act's adoption in the 73 through about 2003, Central Valley Water Board staff and water board staff in regions, North Coast region and the Lahontan region, all participated in the review of commercial timber harvest activities in a very minimal capacity. Our involvement during that period was essentially voluntary. And with staffing numbers within the Central Valley of between 2 and 4 staff over that period, and with such a large region to cover, we were really only able to focus on plans with the highest potential threat to water quality. And usually those were in sensitive watersheds. So with no specific water board permitting mechanisms in place at that time, staff participation was focused on providing an in-field presence to assist with identifying water quality protective measures necessary to put into those plans. In 2001, a legislative change to Port Cologne resulted in the water boards formalizing permitting for commercial harvesting activities. In the Central Valley region, that came in the form of conditional waivers of waste discharge requirements starting in 2003. Early versions of the conditional waiver solely addressed commercial harvests conducted under the forest practice rules. And then in 2005, we included coverage for the Forest Service for their commercial timber harvesting activities, essentially just to hold them to the same standards that we were holding the private lands to. In 2012, passage of Assembly Bill 1492, amongst other things, resulted in the formalization of the water board's involvement in that THP review process. And then in 2017, after about 14 years of conditional waiver implementation and many years of experience in the post-fire salvage logging environment, I'm going to talk about a little bit, the board adopted our timberland management activities general order of waste discharge requirements. And that was both for non-federal and Forest Service green tree, called green tree, and post-fire salvage harvesting activities. Next. So beginning with the lightning storm, some of you may remember back in 2008, we had a lightning storm across the state, started about 1,700 fires, all just within a couple of days of each other, burned more than about 1.6 million acres, which at the time was pretty significant. Program staff increasingly found themselves focusing on those post-fire salvage activities over kind of the more typical green tree commercial harvests that's under our timber harvest plans. So the forest practice rules and act and rules provide a variety of expedited permitting mechanisms for different activities, including post-fire salvage logging. So once a fire sweeps through an area, burned timber begins to degrade, losing its commercial value pretty quickly. So the forest practice rules provide a ministerial permit allowing harvesting to occur quickly under what we call an emergency notice. Those last for about 12 months, and there is no review team process for those. So staff have been prioritizing oversight of post-fire salvage activities because of the potential for water quality impacts in these sensitive post-fire environments. Next. And we've found that after a fire where ground cover is significantly reduced, like you see in this top picture and you'll see in the next one, increases in runoff and stream flow can be expected. Next. And debris, usually in the form of burned logs, sticks, eroded soils, are transported downslope and then downstream, where it can cause impairment and even failure of watercourse crossing structures like bridges and culverts, which is actually what you're seeing here in the lower right photo. And this results in significant infrastructure problems, additional sediment burdens on the water bodies, much beyond that produced by the fire alone. So program staff spend a significant amount of field time these days assessing salvage operations and advising operators of management measures that would limit negative impacts from their activities. Sadly, we're doing quite a lot more of that in the last decade. Anyway, next. So in 2017, I mentioned after 14 years of conditional waiver implementation and many years of experience in the post-fire salvage logging environment, the board adopted our timber general order. While the timber general order provides permit coverage for commercial timber harvesting activities, including those occurring under a bunch of those different forest practice rule ministerial permits, like the post-fire salvage emergency exemptions, it's worth noting that it does not provide regulatory coverage for non-commercialized vegetation management, something that's been a hot topic over the last handful of years. Next. It also does not cover like hazard tree removal before or after a fire, which will be significant for Crystal's portion of the presentation. And it does not cover post-fire reforestation or restoration activities that don't have that commercial timber harvesting component. So this is the most stable and mature of the components of the program. The rest are a little bit newer or are changing. It's well tested, has a set of refined and tested BMPs, formalized administrative process, established and functional interagency relationships, and the Central Valley Water Board has a functional long-term permit based on 2 decades of permit development and 50 years of forest practice rule and BMP development and evaluation. It's a pretty good place to be. Next. Sorry, Jean. Next. And next. All right. So since 2019, I'm going to dig now a little bit into one of our special projects. So in 2019, the year following the camp and car fires, and for 2 years following the adoption of our timber general order, roughly 634,000 pounds of herbicides have been applied in our region since then. On average, that's about 211,000 pounds of herbicides applied per year. Herbicides are typically applied during the replanting phase of forest regeneration or reforestation activities to combat vegetation that may outcompete conifer seedlings for light and other resources. Most of the herbicide applications throughout these years can be attributed to post-fire areas where entire watersheds need reforestation or regeneration. So staff have been evaluating the impacts of herbicide applications in these sensitive environments for quite a number of years now. Next. Oh, yeah. So this is a quick video clip. This is a fire that was harvested, and this is Butte County. Was harvested and pesticides were applied, herbicides were applied to remove competing vegetation. And you can see some of what we're talking about. It's not just the risk of the chemicals getting into the water, but it's also that bare soil that creates some of these issues. Next. So the timber general order, because of these things, we added several provisions specific to herbicide applications in both green tree and post-fire environments. These provisions include this no spray buffer required for post-fire projects. These are for the zones adjacent to water bodies. Dischargers must demonstrate they've achieved 50% ground cover prior to applying herbicides in post-fire. They require notification. We require notification for their planned applications as well. That's actually true for all categories, not just post-fire. So these provisions were supported by a pretty thorough review of literature, as well as some studies that we conducted with Fish and Wildlife, Water Pollution Laboratory, and the United States Geologic Survey's Pesticide Research Group. Those studies demonstrated that pesticides and herbicides applied after fire for regeneration or reforestation activities were entering surface waters. So in our efforts to learn more about the potential impacts of herbicide applications, we've partnered with, as I said, the Department of Fish and Wildlife's lab, the USGS, and most recently with the UC Davis Analytical Laboratory. Most recent study we concluded was conducted in cooperation with the USGS and evaluated specific types of sampling devices and techniques. That ended in 2020. And since then, staff have been independently deploying both passive and active samplers in watersheds exposed to herbicide applications, specifically in that post-fire environment. The images you see on the lower left of the slide are those different types of samplers. And we use GIS to help us prioritize our sampling locations. And that's what you're seeing on that map on the right. So over the years that we have, off a little bit here. So far, most of the time when we do sample in these environments, we find hexazinone and triclopyr, pretty common forested industry herbicides used for controlling those competing species. And we continue to conduct our own sampling independently and conduct these watershed scale evaluations to evaluate potential impacts on surface waters and expand our understanding of active and passive sampling techniques. So we recently entered into, this is the slide, Jean, stay here. We recently entered into a contract with the Southern California Coastal Water Research Project to have them validate and accredit a laboratory analysis method that was developed by the USGS in a previous study that allows for a broad range of detection of pesticides, up to 155 pesticides and degradants. This is significant because currently when staff go out and collect, say, a grab sample, and they essentially have to tell the lab what type of chemical they expect to find. So please search for hexazinone and triclopyr, things like that. This new lab methodology that USGS developed that we're looking to get accredited in California will do something completely different for us. It will allow us to send in samples and say, tell us what's there. So we're also developing a contract right at the moment. I'm getting ready to finalize that for the USGS and UC Davis to address questions involving the specific types of those samplers that I mentioned earlier, kind of where they're going to be best suited to be used. In the post-fire environment, sometimes our headwater streams are really rocky, sometimes they're very flashy. Figuring out exactly which piece of equipment to use when is a really important factor. We're also looking at ways that herbicide concentrations may relate to toxicity in our waters. And that's something we're just getting going on. So next. And then next. There we go. So, and then what? So with our sampling efforts and the various cooperative studies we've established, we're focusing on learning more about herbicide fate and transport in forested and more specifically burned forested environments. We're looking forward to having that accredited lab methodology. Won't just allow us to do that scanning for pesticides, but will be available for the public and other regulatory bodies. We hope to eventually be able to determine level of threat from those proposed applications when we receive those notifications so that we can provide more reasonable response to those proposals. So currently there are not any rules related to herbicide application under the forest practice rules. And so I note that potential changes could occur based upon the information we're gathering. We could certainly change criteria and conditions in our timber general order. Next. We could potentially even be looking at changes to the basin plans. And next. And finally, we'll be sharing our results and our findings with the Board of Forestry and the other agencies involved in oversight of commercial timber harvesting activities for consideration, should it become necessary to be added to the forest practice rules. And with that, I'm going to pass this off to Griffin for the next section.
Angela, can I ask you a question?
You can.
I don't know, I might be jumping the gun here, considering how much development is still ongoing. But has there been any correlation that you guys have observed between the amount of pesticides or herbicides applied in a specific area that gets in surface water? That hasn't been developed.
Not at this time. We have not identified a significant correlation.
And with all those different herbicides, I imagine there aren't water quality objectives set for each of them, toxicity studies.
No, there is not.
All right, thank you.
Good morning, Chair Bradford, members of the board. My name is Griffin Perea. I am a senior engineering geologist in the Reading office under Angela in the Forest Activities Program. So I will be providing an update on a second component of the Forest Activities Program and something relatively recent in utility corridor management and regulatory development. Slide. So as a very brief history, all the way back in 2018, Senate Bill 901 was adopted and signed into law. And so really that bill, among other things, is what kickstarted the need and requirements for enhanced vegetation management, system hardening, and a lot of other wildfire related activities specific to investor owned utilities throughout the state. So the figure on the right is an overview of at least the large major investor-owned utilities and their territories. This requirement set up the need for wildfire mitigation plans to be developed and submitted by these utilities to a newly created office, which is now under the CNRA, California Natural Resources Agency, originally under the Public Utilities Commission, but was moved over. And so the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety is kind of the head of all of these requirements and is responsible for review and approval of these wildfire mitigation plans. So along with that, due to the increased scope and scale of this type of work, the water boards statewide were allocated resources as well to develop regulatory requirements and really just start dealing with the increased pace and scale of these activities. Advance, Gene. And so this is a map that is produced by the Public Utilities Commission that really highlights those areas of moderate, high, and extreme fire danger. And these are the areas where these activities are primarily focused and is the highest priority for these utility companies to complete this work. Next slide. So the scale of this is pretty phenomenal. So there's roughly 35,000 miles of high voltage transmission lines throughout the state. Within the Central Valley region, next, Gene, roughly half of that falls within the Central Valley region. So the scale of this work that we are now required to oversee and develop regulations around is very, very large. And it should be noted, this is only the high voltage transmission lines and does not include distribution lines, which are also subject to these requirements. Next slide. And so since 2018, what have we been doing? Doing a bunch. It's been a lot of development in an area that we really haven't previously had a lot of regulatory oversight. Our field staff have been really focusing on conducting field work, interfacing with the different utility companies, really trying to get our hands wrapped around, okay, what is it that you all are doing? How are you organized? And how ultimately is this going to be affecting water quality and how to best deal with that? Along with that, State Board has been charged with development of a statewide general order to cover these activities, provide requirements and best management practices to ensure that these will not have adverse impacts to water quality. Through all of this, a key underpinning has been a really large amount of coordination. With development of any new program, there's a lot of interagency coordination that has to occur and make sure we're not stepping on each other's toes and we're doing everything in lockstep. And then a lot of external coordination with the utility companies themselves to best figure out, based on their structure, how they plan activities, really kind of how they operate. How are we going to be able to fit our regulations into that and make sure we're getting what we need as well? Next slide. So, underlying water quality concerns associated with this work. The underlying concerns are very similar to what Angela just presented on. It's really looking at ground disturbance, access roads, water course crossings, a lot of those very similar types of activities. These are all occurring in a pretty broad spectrum of activities that the utilities are doing, which includes pre-fire vegetation management, system hardening activities, which is actual replacement of poles and reconductoring lines, as well as post-fire restoration and remediation. The post-fire arena, is to be expected, has actually shown to be the most challenging and the most potential impacts to water quality based on our experiences so far. One of the unique, I guess, issues that is faced by utilities is there's a much more limited area that this work occurs in. If the utilities do need to put in an access road or reconstruct, they're limited in the easement that they have or the right of way that they have, depending on exactly what those agreements look like. There's a lot of shared use agreements between Forest Service or other private landowners to provide this access and really conduct this work. So it's that complexity is one of the things that makes this so unique and a little bit more challenging. Just the layout of utility lines, they go over steep terrain where we may not see other types of activities that would be conducted on that same type of terrain. Especially in the post-fire environment that we've seen over the past few years, that has been a very significant challenge to overcome. So the next few slides, I'm going to provide some before and after photos just of some specific projects and areas that our staff have been involved in. So like I mentioned previously, a lot of issues surround access roads and ground disturbance. Those are some of the main conduits for stormwater runoff, erosion, and sediment discharge to receiving water bodies. So in this example, staff were inspecting a system hardening project that did require access road reconstruction, noted several issues with the overall drainage and design considerations of that road. Next. And ultimately worked with the company to voluntarily improve the road drainage system, improve the water course crossings along that transmission line, and conduct monitoring for effectiveness a couple years after implementation. Next slide. Another example of really an access road that we would honestly not normally see being constructed in this area. The slopes were significantly steep, unstable, and normally we would not see this type of access needed. With our staff involvement, however, again, we were able to work with the utility companies. Ultimately, in this example, next, decided to work with them to abandon this section of road. Overall, the maintenance and water quality risks associated with keeping it intact outweighed the need for it. So we were able to work with them to abandon, remediate the slopes, as well as perform some channel restoration activities. Next slide. This is another photo of that same area looking down towards the North Fork Feather River. And so you can see the fill that was associated with the previous road had been side cast and was impacting the active bank and active channel of the North Fork Feather River. Next. And with the abandonment, a large amount of fill was able to be removed, allowing again for that floodplain to develop and not impacting or impeding the natural channel. Next. In this similar area, post-fire environment, again, we found an access road that had been eroding and discharging ultimately to a water course that is right at the bottom of the photo. Next. With our work with the company in this situation, again, we were able to oversee and push them to improve the drainage, harden the road system, and ultimately ensure that this wouldn't be an issue moving forward. One of the big struggles that we do have with some of these areas is the need for these roads that we wouldn't normally see to be maintained ongoing into the future. They do need access. They are required to perform inspections routinely on their lines. And so we really do have to get creative with some of the measures that need to get deployed to make sure that water quality is not being impacted. Through all of these examples, our staff have used kind of the myriad of tools available to us. We have been able to work cooperatively in some instances, and others we have had to use our enforcement abilities to ensure that the cleanup and remediation is conducted appropriately and to ensure that it's going to be monitored and maintained into the future. Next. So based on all of our field experiences, it has given us a unique opportunity when working with State Board to develop a statewide general order. Our staff have been kind of looked at as the experts in the field because we have had so many experiences to date. We can bring that knowledge and bring that information when working with State Board to develop a set of regulations that is really going to be as effective as possible based on all of our experiences so far. So the State Board is currently drafting a statewide general order to cover as many of these activities as possible under one order, which is pretty difficult. There's a lot of different unique activities. There's a lot of different issues related to those, and there's a lot of overlap and interplay with existing permitting mechanisms. And so these types of projects, they could require 404 permits and 401 certifications. They could require timber harvest permitting if they are removing and selling commercial species, and they could trigger construction stormwater permits. And so where we're at with this is really trying to find that those gaps and use this statewide general order to fill those gaps where other permitting requirements don't exist. And that has been a pretty big struggle. It's, you know, the trying to find adequate requirements to mitigate some of these extreme activities is really where our staff have been able to provide a lot of useful information and a lot of real world experiences when developing those requirements. Next slide. So these, sorry, I forgot to mention the photos. These photos are just aerial examples of some of the, you know, the utility corridors or layout and the ground disturbances associated with them. Next slide. And finally, the level of coordination that we've been having to continue with throughout the development of this program. Internally, it has been monthly, if not weekly, coordination with regional boards as well as state board, especially with one developing this statewide general order. But secondly, especially with the regional boards working in this new arena, we really do want to make sure we're being as consistent as possible across region board boundaries. These are one of those program areas where the utility corridors are, they do the same activities, the same type of stuff, no matter which regional board boundary you're in. So we really need to ensure that consistency. So when we're working with the same company, we're not hearing two different things depending on which side of the line they're on. And so that has been a very big effort. I know of ours is working with our other regions as we're going through any of our enforcement efforts or any of our site investigations, really keeping close ties to make sure that we're making similar recommendations and we're going through the same steps and processes. With other state agencies, that has been another large focus of our coordination, especially with the Office of Energy Infrastructure Safety, which again is the office that has ultimate responsibility for the wildfire mitigation plan approval process and overseeing all of this work across the state. We have been chasing down a lot of coordination with them specifically because of their role kind of at the head of all this. We want to make sure that where we can work together or leverage our resources, we're doing that, as well as data needs. If we're looking at prioritization or looking at specific risk models that we're trying to build into this process, that we're being able to leverage anything that they're already requiring in that same arena. And finally, externally, we have had a lot of ongoing coordination with the utility companies themselves. Again, some of it voluntary, some of it through our cleanup efforts. But we have really wanted to use that effort to better understand how they're organized, how they plan work, what type of risk analysis they may do when planning this work, and if there is a way to kind of insert our water quality concerns even before having a general order in place to that planning framework. One of the big needs that we've seen and has been an ongoing issue is data. With the 35,000 miles transmission line statewide, simply knowing when and where work is occurring is really a big benefit to our staff. We would better be able to prioritize inspections. Can't be at all these sites at once, so we do need to figure out a way to prioritize based on water quality risks. And so we've been working pretty cooperatively with a lot of the large investor-owned utilities to see if we can fill those data gaps, allowing us to better prioritize our workload where we're doing inspections, as well as allowing them to perhaps have some level of prioritization when it comes to seeking permits or making sure they have the correct type of regulatory coverage. Next. With that was my spiel on our development of the utility portion of Angela's program.
Thanks, Griffin.
Morning, Chair Bradford, members of the board. My name is Misty Pontus. I'm an environmental scientist in the non-point source unit within the Forest Activities Program. going to be speaking to you today about the third component of the Forest Activities Program, which is federal lands regulation, focusing specifically on the development of our new proposed non-point source permit and the associated training contract. Next slide. Our team has been developing proposed non-point source permit for lands managed by the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. You heard Angela recently, her last talk, about the current general order, which covers commercial timber harvest on activities on lands managed by the United States Forest Service. We recognize that there are many other activities that occur through lands managed by the United States Forest Service and the Bureau of Land Management. And they have the potential to generate non-point source discharges. So the proposed new permit will cover both federal land managers and cover a broader variety of activities on forest land management. So this map is just showing you the outline of Region 5. And the green is lands managed by the United States Forest Service, and the brown is Bureau of Land Management. Okay, next slide. The activities proposed for permit coverage are listed here. They include things like vegetation management, restoration, and recreational facilities management. Under the proposed programmatic permit, we will be establishing standards. We will be establishing standards of practice and expectations regarding water quality protection, primarily in the form of BMPs or best management practices. We'll be requiring adaptive management and progressive improvements, and we will create prioritization standards for addressing existing sources of non-point source pollution across federal lands in the region. Next slide. Jean, can you click? That works. Our team works closely with the United States Forest Service's specialists to implement the 2017 Timberland Management Activity General Order for commercial harvesting. Over the past several decades, we have observed inconsistent application of BMPs aimed to prevent and minimize water quality impacts from operations. So, with the implementation and drastic change in scope and coverage with the proposed federal non-point source permit, we recognize an opportunity to increase understanding and awareness in order to improve water quality protection through training. To accomplish this, the proposed federal non-point source permit will require federal staff responsible for permit compliance to complete a course of professionally produced training modules. Jean, can you click it again? This required training and certification is a unique feature of the non-point source unit and a first for the Forest Activities Program. The online modules will provide information about the proposed federal non-point source permit, including water board policies and authorities. Modules will cover monitoring and reporting for compliance with the new permit, best management practices for water quality protection, like the diagram you see here. Photos, videos, and other imagery will be used to display the content to keep the viewer engaged. Staff completing the training program will receive a certification indicating they have finished the training and have the knowledge and ability to identify water quality issues in the field, as well as perform monitoring and reporting for permit compliance. The training modules are being produced by an experienced contractor, and we expect it to be ready about August of 2024. Okay, next slide. So why are we adding a training program? We are looking to broaden the understanding of water quality issues and protective BMPs, to leverage all levels of federal agency staff, from seasonal to permanent, and from biologists to road engineers. It will also assist in the transition from a few projects in the general order to many with the new proposed federal non-point source permit. Ultimately, we want to see the training promote a greater understanding of water quality issues and consideration of water quality protection and restoration as part of the everyday management of their lands. So basically, more eyes out there for us to watch out for water quality.
Hi, Jean, can you click to the next slide? Good morning, Chair Bradford, members of the board. My name is Crystal Taylor, and I'm an environmental scientist at the State Water Board's Emergency Management Program. And I'm going to be talking to you today about kind of a bird's eye view of some of the wildfire response and recovery activities that my program and the Central Valley have been involved in over the last few years. So I'm going to start with an overview of some of the recent wildfire activity in the region. Then we're going to talk about the secretarial suspensions and the environmental protection plan that support some of these recovery activities. And then I'm going to highlight the Feather River Watershed Working Group that we're involved with. And then we're going to talk about our lessons learned workshop. Next slide, please. So these are just some of the fires that have occurred in the region since 2018. I don't have all of them listed here, just the ones that had a larger impact and required a little bit more time from staff. But even still, just having a few of these highlighted here, you can see the impact's pretty significant. For these fires, over 3 million acres were, consumed in total, with about 75% of that, or a little over 2 million, existing within the region's boundaries. Next slide. So this is a map that just displays the information that I shared on the previous slide. And I just wanted to briefly describe why the acreages look a little different. And that's just because some of these fires crossed the regional board boundaries. And so once you clip that off, the acreages are a little bit different, but it's still pretty significant. And from the map, you can see the Reading office in particular has been heavily impacted in the last few fire seasons. Next slide, please. I also thought it would be kind of interesting just to show the scope of landscape impact over a larger time frame. So I've also included the fire history since 2010. As you can see here, there's almost 500 fires that occurred across the region, consuming, over 5 million acres, and about 4 million of that existing within the region's boundaries. So again, pretty significant fire history within the Central Valley Water Board's boundaries. Next slide, please. So now I'm going to talk to you about the secretarial suspensions and the environmental protection plan that support some of the post-fire recovery activities. So the phase 2 debris and hazard tree removal activities, this is where Cal OES and Cal Recycle, or the counties, they go in and they remove the post-fire, the hazardous debris and hazard trees that are left afterwards so that landowners can, go back home. And this does need to happen quickly so they can get home and rebuild their homes and rebuild their communities, as quickly as possible, which is why they're typically conducted under regulatory suspension. And these suspensions are signed by both the secretaries of the California Environmental Protection Agency and the California Natural Resources Agency. So CNRA also suspends some of their rules and regulations as well. And it suspends the administrative processes, fees, and enrollment for certain environmental permitting requirements. And this authority is granted to us. We're able to do this because the governor writes executive orders, usually right after the fire, that basically direct the resource protection agencies to cut the green tape and allow this work to happen more quickly. Caveat to that is this is only applicable to state rules and regulations, so all federal rules still apply. So federal Clean Water Act requirements are still in place. So as I mentioned, the suspensions they're not a full waiver of everything. It's just a waiver of the administrative processes and fees. They still have to follow environmental protection requirements. And we've developed an environmental protection plan that identifies best management practices that they should be following while they're working under a suspension. And this is done jointly with CDFW, CAL FIRE, and Cal OES so that it's, more comprehensive. All the agencies are involved and it's one document. And again, the purpose is to mitigate and prevent environmental impacts, including those of water quality. There are sometimes other types of projects that, like wildfire restoration projects, that will request to use suspensions per the executive orders, but those are evaluated case by case because we need to ensure that they're meeting the eligibility requirements that are outlined in the executive orders. They were kind of written for phase 2, but Cal OES left it a little bit open so that there's a small window of other projects that can be included. Next slide, please. So I do want to talk about the development of this environmental protection plan because it took a lot of time from, across the regions, but in particular, Region 5 contributed a lot. So in previous years, going back to 2018, we would create a new one every single fire season, and it would be specific to counties that were identified in the executive order. And then we would have to go in and make addendums and changes as additional counties would be added later, depending on how significant the fire season was. And we often would get maybe a week's notice that we would have to have this environmental protection plan ready to go for them to use. So that meant that we didn't have time to make it as comprehensive as maybe we would have liked. So in 2022, we all collectively decided that we were going to, put something new together and start early. And so we've been working on developing, actually we finished it, but we developed a new environmental protection plan that shelf ready to go, and it is truly applicable statewide. And it took a lot of work from everyone involved, in particular, a lot of the folks that are sitting here in the room today. It is done. We finished it in April of 2023, so it is ready to be used for the 2023 wildfire season. And it's very likely we'll be using it for a couple of the fires in Siskiyou County in the North Coast region. Next slide. So I did want to speak briefly on kind of why we did this. I touched on it already a little bit, but we wanted to have something that's already ready to go, and we wanted to have plenty of time to make sure it was comprehensive and cohesive. In the past, when we had maybe a week's notice, Cal OES was coming to each agency separately and asking us, what are your BMPs? What are your best management practices? And then they would just kind of slap them together, and it wasn't very cohesive. So this time, all the agencies worked on it together. It's much more cohesive, it's more organized. And the hope here is that it's going to reduce the need for as much staff consultation. Not that staff won't still be out there, but the consultation needs will be less, and then make it easier for the contractors to understand and comply with. Because in the past, staff had seen serious issues of non-compliance with the provisions that were outlined in the EPP, and a lot of it was just a lack of understanding. And so we've added definitions, we've added quick reference guides, we've reorganized and restructured to hopefully kind of alleviate some of that, and it's all ready to go. Next slide, please. So I also wanted to describe, maybe for those who might not be familiar, why we are involved with this and why we need to issue these suspensions. And so these activities often occur near waters of the state. These fires are burning in the wildland urban interface, and these communities are often situated, these homes and structures and businesses. Sometimes they're right on stream banks, other times they're pretty close. And as you've heard described by Angela and Griffin and Misty, the use of roads can create a lot of issues, and they have to do that in this post-fire recovery environment. They're doing water course crossings, they're doing ground disturbing activities with heavy equipment. They have processing sites and staging areas that they're using. So there's potential for a lot of impact if it's not properly mitigated for, and staff from the region do go out and inspect to make sure that they're complying with the EPP. Next slide, please. So another post-fire activity that we're heavily involved with is the Feather River Watershed Working Group. And so this working group was born out of a coordination effort for the Camp Fire in 2018, and Central Valley has been heavily involved in this group. They actually started it in the beginning and brought everybody together, and then expanded in 2020 to include the North Complex Fire, and again in 2021 to include the Dixie Fire. And this group seeks to address impacts to the watershed and water quality from multiple years of, catastrophic wildfire on the landscape. And we have We have local agencies, federal agencies, state agencies, local NGOs. We have a local tribe that participates. So we have a lot of different folks participating, and we have different disciplines. We have scientists and engineers and geologists, but we also have local emergency managers, public affairs officers. So there's a spread of interested parties that are collaborating together on this work. And the group coordinates water quality monitoring and data collection and sharing, and how that information gets shared with the public. And then whenever one agency gets immediate inquiry related to this topic, we coordinate with each other to make sure that everybody is saying the same thing. And that all the other interested parties are aware that we're having these engagements. And the group also provides technical guidance and support to some of the local entities who are doing recovery. And another goal is really to just connect with the community and make sure that they have the opportunity to understand what's happening in their community after the fire with their water. During COVID, there was a couple of Facebook Live meetings that were held with the public. And I felt like these were pretty successful. There was a lot of engagement. And if I'm remembering right, there was even an additional monitoring site that was added based off of feedback that we got from the public during the North Complex fire. So this group, even though we're not, thankfully, this watershed has gotten a break the last year and a half, but the group still continues to meet monthly. We want to make sure that everybody stays connected. That way, when fire eventually comes back, we don't have to scramble to figure out, is so-and-so still at the agency? Did they leave? We have that continuity in place, and it's very easy to get everybody back together more quickly if we need to. One of the big things that the group is currently working on while we have some breathing room is a lessons learned document. This group has been doing this for a few years now, and we've figured out processes and procedures on how to coordinate better with each other, and just things that we've learned as we've gone through this experience that we thought we would document, so that if or when it comes to other parts of the state, other folks might be able to use some of what we've learned for their activities as well. And actually, we were asked to share our draft with Maui to help with their wildfire recovery efforts in Hawaii. So we did share that, and they have it. So that was pretty cool. Next slide, please. So I wanted to give some context for why this watershed in particular is so significant. It spans 2.3 million acres, and over 1.3 million acres have been burned or impacted by fire since 2018. And that's about 57% of the watershed. You can see on this map that was created by our partners at Department of Water Resources that if you go back even farther, it's pretty significant. And this watershed, like all of these surface waters, eventually come into Lake Oroville, which is one of the primary storage facilities for the State Water Project. And it delivers water to approximately 2/3 of California's population, and it's used for drinking water, agriculture, power, recreation. So it's a pretty important watershed. It's also very rich in biodiversity. It's considered to be more biodiverse than both Yellowstone and Yosemite National Parks, and it's also a nationally recognized hotspot for wildlife conservation. So the importance of this watershed really can't be understated, and the impacts that it's seen over the last few years kind of just highlight the continued need for coordination in this area. Next slide, please. So the last thing I'm going to cover is our lessons learned workshop. So my program, the Emergency Management Program, holds an annual lessons learned workshop every year. In the wildfire session we held in March of 2023 this year, and it was a hybrid meeting, and it was our first hybrid meeting that we've held. And we had really great participation. We had some folks attend in person in Sacramento. We had some online, and we had a lot of support from Region 5 in particular. And it was really good for us to have all of you there because as you've seen, this region has a lot of experience with fire. And so having the region there to help steer the discussion and help provide input and help the other regions understand type of activities and impacts and challenges was really helpful for us. But in these workshops, we discuss what has been working with our emergency coordination, what hasn't been working, what we can improve on. And we identified some action items that my program's been working on since then. And we've been working with the regions in Region 5 on getting those nailed down. And that is all I have. Oh, and I have my contact information on the slide if you guys have questions later.
Thank you, Crystal.
Morning, Chair Bradford, members of the board. My name is Brian Smith. I'm a supervising engineer here in the Reading office. And on my part of the presentation today, I'll give an update on an important post-wildfire recovery project in the town of Paradise. Slide up. And then following my section, Assistant Executive Officer Clint Snyder will finish off the presentation and discuss the California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force. The town of Paradise is located about 15 miles east of the city of Chico in Butte County. Before the 2018 Camp Fire that you've heard about, the town of Paradise was home to more than 26,000 residents in an area of about 18 square miles. It was the largest community in California served entirely by septic systems for wastewater disposal. It does not have a public sewer system like most similarly sized communities. And due to several factors, the use of septic systems in Paradise is unsustainable and is a threat to groundwater quality. Paradise has many parcels that don't provide sufficient area for an appropriately sized septic system. The area also has high groundwater and poor soils, which means that it's easy for wastewater from septic systems to get into the groundwater without first receiving good treatment in soil. Problem with septic systems in Paradise is well known, has been the subject of numerous studies and planning over the years. Next slide. In November of 2018, the Camp Fire devastated the town of Paradise. The Camp Fire was the deadliest, most destructive wildfire in California's history. 85 fatalities, 153,000 acres burned, and 18,000 structures destroyed. The town of Paradise lost 83% of its population literally overnight. Although the Butte County area saw an exodus of over 16,000 residents, the nearby city of Chico's population increased by about 20%, with residents who lost their homes at the Camp Fire. Rapid population increase in Chico caused a spike in the city's sewer flows, yet sewer rate revenue didn't increase commensurately because the new residents were housed in existing dwellings that were already paying fixed sewer rates. So the city of Chico, although unburned by the Camp Fire, also experienced impacts from it. Significant efforts are being made to help the town of Paradise recover. And while the Camp Fire was a massive tragedy, the regional board has been working with the town to pursue responsible rebuilding opportunities, specifically to address the historical septic systems problems. Next slide. So following the November 2018 Camp Fire, the town of Paradise started receiving a lot of state and federal funding for recovery in 2019. Predictably, one of the constraints the town ran into with redevelopment was the lack of a sewer system. So the town revived past planning efforts for a sewer system, and the Regional Water Board participated in the engineering study of alternatives. The town initially began investigating construction of a local sewer system and treatment plant. However, state and regional water board policies favor regionalization of sewer systems rather than building multiple small isolated systems. The economies of scale gained from larger regional wastewater treatment plants allow for better fiscal and environmental outcomes. In this case, the Regional Water Board encouraged the town of Paradise to connect into the city of Chico's existing wastewater treatment plant. That is to pursue regionalization of sewer services with Chico. In January of 2020, the town of Paradise and the city of Chico, with state agency support, began work towards regionalization. In December 2020 and February 2021, the town and city, respectively, entered into a cooperative work agreement to evaluate regionalization. In April 2021, the State Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance provided $1.8 million for assessment and planning work, including preparation of an environmental impact report. Next slide. Over the course of the next year, from April 2021 to March 2022, a sewer regionalization project advisory committee comprised of representatives from the town and the city met to guide the regionalization process. Regional Water Board staff facilitated the meetings and participated in staff level working sessions to foster public engagement, develop a principles of agreement, analyze wastewater flows and Chico treatment plant capacity needs, evaluate regulatory requirements, determine connection fees, and prepare a programmatic environmental impact report. Next slide. The Sewer Regionalization Project Advisory Committee efforts were successful, and in June 2022, the city and town unanimously approved a principles of agreement. In August 2022, the California Department of Housing and Community Development announced a $30 million grant to the town for sewer design and right-of-way acquisition. In November 2022, the town unanimously approved the environmental impact report. In February of 2023, the town and city unanimously entered into an intermunicipal agreement for a regionalized sewer system. And in June 2023, the Butte County Local Agency Formation Commission, or LAFCO, approved the plan to extend Chico sewer service to Paradise. Next slide. So since the Camp Fire in 2018, significant progress toward a sewer system in the town of Paradise has been made. This is a major and very unique project, and the price tag is large. This slide summarizes the remaining next steps that are in progress. A funding application completeness determination by the State Water Board's Division of Financial Assistance is pending. The total cost estimate for this project is $228 million. So as funding is available, project design and permitting will commence, followed by a construction schedule for the core sewer system through 2026. Yes. So while this project has a ways to go yet, it is an example of communities trying to recover from wildfire and leverage opportunities and resources in a smart way to promote long-term sustainability, both a fiscal and environmental standpoint. And unless there are questions, I'll pass the presentation off to Clint Snyder to talk about California Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force.
You go to the next slide there. Okay. So, good morning. Again, Clint Snyder, Assistant Executive Officer of the Water Board here in the office. Slide is here for you to read or to digest. It's really just to try to illustrate the point that I want to make in wrapping up some of the work that staff and management team presented to you today. It's often easy to look at a lot of this work as a coordination effort. But I think one of the important takeaways from all of this is that one, most of this work that's been described today, a lot of the work that we're currently involved with, the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, and all the work that comes from that action plan has occurred since 2018. We're really talking the last 5 years. And we consider COVID, it's pretty significant work that all of the staff have been working through, and not just here at Central Valley Water Board. we interact with a tremendous amount of external agencies, stakeholders, with the local, state, and federal level. And we often get there's often an assumption that, the water boards should be at the table. But where is the water board in this? I think what oftentimes there isn't quite the appreciation of, the water boards are 10 different agencies, right? By statute, 9 regional boards, state water board. And so often before we can really engage with an external agency, there's a tremendous amount of coordination that has to happen internally here at the water boards before we can move forward. And in addition to that, the projects that we're really talking about are different in a lot of ways from a lot of our classic programs. Primarily in that when we pull a lever on any one of these projects, it's going to impact the way another agency does something or would do something had we not acted or reacted. And so we have to be really cognizant of the fact that this is a very different program in many regards. To coordinate internally requires a lot of effort, and much of this is voluntary, right? The wildfire program here at the water boards isn't necessarily built in statute like a lot of our other programs are. We don't have a fully built out set of policies and regulations that we can rely on and point to that say, when encountering this, do this. And so through this whole process, we've really pulled a group of people together throughout the state and regional water boards, some managerial, some policy, some legal, some technical experts from across the state to make this work. And I want to give you just a sense of kind of the organizations that are involved within the water boards, RDOs, regions, divisions, and offices. This work really requires, the North Coast Water Board, the Central Valley Water Board, Ohio Water Board, the Emergency Management Program. As you heard from Crystal, Division of Water Quality at the State Water Board, Office of Council, Office of Enforcement, Office of Legislative Affairs, LEPA. So each time, we get together and we do regularly this particular group to talk about sort of what's on the table at the time, types of projects, types of discussions, types of meetings that we're all engaged in, and try to create through the discussion sort of a consolidated approach, even up to and including consolidated messaging. So the column on the far left is really just the program leads. We've had to design this program differently than a lot of our other programs are designed. Here, we've assigned an individual to lead a specific area of the program. And they come from all of those agencies or orgs that I just described. And then next to that is the focused area. So that particular program lead is in charge of the focused area. And there are a lot of individuals who work with that program lead to do work, right? We have to accomplish goals. This isn't just a conversation that we're having. But along with that, we also have to recognize that there are a lot of other established programs here at the water boards that we just can't ignore. We think about wildfire, when we think about the utility corridor permit. It's one thing to develop a utility corridor permit, but we also have to remember that there are a lot of statutory requirements through the construction stormwater permit, through our water quality surge program, so on and so forth. And so each one of those programs has a program manager, most often situated at the state water board. They have a long list of protocols and permits and things that are already in place. In order for us to develop things, in order for us to engage in external agencies, we've got to make sure that we're also coordinating with those folks, which adds a whole nother layer of complexity and at times, can slow some things down. But once we get all of that put together, then we've got to step out and coordinate with the other external agencies. And I'll just run through a really quick list here. But the Cal EPA, the CNRA, Cal Recycle, Office of Emergency Services, CAL FIRE, the Office of Energy Infrastructure and Safety, which was a branch of the CPUC that moved over to the CNRA as part of the Senate Bill 901 bill. Department of Fish and Wildlife, California Geologic Survey, Department of Water Resources, and the whole number of local and federal agencies that we need to coordinate with. So I don't want to belabor the point here other than to say the organization has really had to adapt from our classic sort of organizational structure within the different programs to create kind of a framework that will facilitate all of the coordination and work that needs to occur kind of within this forestry, management, utility, wildfire arena. So that's where we're at now. We got a lot of work to do still, but stop there. I think everyone here is available for questions if you have any.
Thank you, everybody, for that. That was a lot of information, and yeah, I guess my overall impression, my reaction is kind of a hell of a lot of work in 5 years, and considering how many other agencies are involved, I'm surprised how much work has been accomplished so far. I want to, on that subject, not going into all the agencies, but coordinating these different programs and activities, is there a lead agency at all? Is somebody driving spaceship here or what?
There are a number of different leads. When we speak specifically about,
The answer is kind of no.
but with regard to the Wildfire and Forest Resilience Task Force, CNRA does lead that particular company. We're partners with other agencies in other arenas. But yeah, it's fairly complex.
It's like it.
My comment would be, I mean, you're especially the fires in 2018, I think exposed the fact that California's approach to regulating these lands, and not just, I mean, forest lands, even the federal permit, I think it's what, 11 million acres, just a staggering amount of land. Add in the other 10 odd so million acres that are in the WUI, the wild land urban interface area, incredibly balkanized in terms of what the regulatory approach was. I have to give a lot of credit to Clint for helping to corral folks together. There are certainly allies that we have within other agencies, State Water Board, and kind of creating the emergency management program, and with the wildfire component, deserve a lot of credit for thinking proactively about that. But if there is not a single kind of wildfire management or forest management czar. It's a lot of cross agency collaboration there. I think one of the things that, as we look forward to the upcoming years of this program, I think we're going to continue to advance concepts. I know Clint's kind of working on one now to consolidate all the multiple kind of regulatory and legislative proposals that have been made out there. Wildfire rips through a certain legislative district, and the legislature is asked to do something. And absolutely, that's the right approach. But I think we've had that cycle after cycle after cycle, and so we've got a dozen or so different reporting requirements, dozen or so different little work groups, and established by legislative proposals over the years. I think we're at the stage where we need to work to consolidate those and figure out, how can we align the reporting? How can we align the responsibilities? Figure out what that massively complicated Venn diagram really should look like, so that we're not stepping on folks' toes, and that we develop areas of expertise within that structure, where we can say, well, not really water board's responsibility, that's CNRA's responsibility. Here's a contact point, or vice versa, saying that this is something that squarely falls within water quality protection. But Clint and his team deserve an incredible amount of credit for working with just about everybody in the legislature and other agencies to try and untangle this knot. Again, those reflexive actions, we got to do something about it. I think they're absolutely correct. But it's happened in a kind of piecemeal fashion over the past 10 years.
Thanks for that. It seems like such a complex program, and that last slide you put up, I didn't have to read it. because there are enough boxes there, enough acronyms that I knew how complicated it is to coordinate with all those agencies. And obviously the water board isn't driving post-fire recovery and firefighting, it's CAL FIRE and Natural Resource Agency, but it's good to hear that there's a program being developed to train federal partners being aware of the water quality impacts of their activities. That was helpful to hear about. I am curious, I think Angela mentioned the federal exemption for the timberland management program, general order rather. And what's the nexus between that and the non-point source permit that does include Forest Service? And I got that straight.
Might have to try again. I'm a little confused.
So you mentioned there's a federal exemption for the timberland harvest general management order. Right?
Oh, I think I was talking about the forest practice rules offer an exemption for post-fire salvage. Is that what you're?
That's what it is.
And you were asking about the nexus.
Well, are they, so you said they are exempt. Is that the Forest Service and BLM and all federal agencies are exempt?
Oh, I see. Yeah, I understand. So the forest practice rules they're primarily built to facilitate timber harvest plan projects, right? The Forest Practice Act determined that there were a number of reasons why there would need to be a quicker, faster process for doing other types of things. So post-fire salvage is one of those things. So there's a list of exemptions. Those exemptions are technically just exemptions from getting a timber harvest plan. So that only applies to state and private lands.
And the non-point source permit, that is applicable to Forest Service and.
Yeah, so the proposed permit will be specific to the Forest Service and the BLM. In California, it will be to the regional offices that manage those lands in California.
Thank you. Sean.
Well, I just want to express my gratitude to the team of presenting this very comprehensive process. I was fortunate to be able to tour with our team, I think a couple of years ago, one or two of the fire sites in Northern California, and saw the post process of recovering from fire. And it's very intensive and very it's a big job. And I think that without seeing it in person, one could only imagine. But with that said, I also wanted to say thank you for all the work that you do to collaborate with other agencies. As you guys alluded to, there's countless of agencies that are involved in this process, and to see and hear you all talked about the process, it's incredible, difficult, and it's very appreciative. I have a question regarding the funding. Who makes the decision in terms of how much funding goes to what project?
So I can speak at least a little bit to the funding, and then Clint can fill in. So the commercial timber harvesting component of the program is supported by the Timber Regulation and Forest Restoration Fund, which was established with AB 1492 in 2012. So that's how we support the staff that work in the commercial timber harvest component, and a little bit of the staff that work in the federal lands component. The utility activities are covered by the Waste Discharge Permit Fund, as well as some of the general fund. So that specifically supports the water board staff to do this work, but I don't know. Yeah.
I can weigh in real quick. So Angela's absolutely right. You know, it comes from permit fees, and we also have a small component. If you ever go to Home Depot and buy a 2x4, you'll see that little 5-cent charge, something like that. That actually is part of AB 1492. that helps fund some of the programs within that sphere. But it's in terms of what the resource allocations are, a lot of that is the conversations as part of the budgeting process that the state board works with the regions on.
Thanks again. Really appreciate it.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I just sort of want to echo some of the past comments, but Clint and your staff, I mean, it's a lot of stuff right there. It's a lot of people hours into that work, and you know, you have a lot of other work on your plate as well. So it's I don't say I fully get it, but I get it, and I thank you and your staff, obviously, for the time and effort into this, as well as the state board and other stakeholders. I do have a question for Brian on Paradise, but I want to, before I get to that, I want to ask in terms of the efforts to make this whole coordination effort more efficient. Is there an effort to do that, or is it just kind of happening ad hoc as we go? Or is there a coordinated effort to try to?
Yes, there is a coordinated effort. I think you know, there is leadership within Cal EPA, leadership within CNRA that kind of support those efforts, and I think Clint is helping herd the cats to try and drive things forward. I think there's, you know, the Wildfire Force Resiliency Task Force had some kind of goals to head in that direction. Problem is there's a lot of billiard balls on the table, and a lot of folks looking out for different interests. And I think, to be honest, if you look back on kind of regulatory programs such as the Irrigated Lands Regulatory Program, there's a lot of shared responsibility there. So I don't know if there is exactly like one head, one kind of forest management czar that's tasked with streamlining this, but we're trying to push in that direction. I think there is more interest at the state board and at Cal EPA to try and head in that direction and interface with the folks at CNRA, because really we're probably the two biggest ones that need to kind of align things, and things will start moving the right way. Because CNRA obviously covers DWR, Cal Fire, Fish and Wildlife, and so you know we get those folks all in alignment, and we're in pretty good shape.
Yeah. I mean, certainly at the end of the day, you know, we're talking about people and recovering from the impacts of wildfire, and you know, with climate change, sadly, we're going to see more of this. And at the end of the day, it's trying to get people's lives back in order. And I think on that note, Brian, relative to the town of Paradise, you know, in terms of the rebuilding effort, so there's this regional sewer effort. I get that. I don't know, maybe in your presentation you had what the total price tag was. I don't know what that is and whether that funding is available to implement that project. In the interim period, what is happening relative to people in Paradise trying to rebuild their homes, which obviously need septic systems? How is that working?
There's a couple pieces there. Maybe the second piece first. Rebuilding is occurring. There is no sewer, so any rebuilding is being done using modernized septic systems, I guess, just to put it that way. But it is constraining what can be developed. So, you know, individual homes further up into the hills, you know, maybe that's workable. You know, there's certainly making a modern system is more expensive than kind of what was installed in a lot of these places, you know, pre-fire. But the real challenge is in kind of the commercial corridor, which is kind of the focus of the sewering project, where you really can't come in and rebuild what they would like to, right? You're constrained based on being able to get rid of that wastewater. So rebuilding is happening, but it is a challenge. I think, you know, what we would really,
and if I could, Brian, I think in terms of the bigger picture, $182 million is the price figure that has been floated out there by the town. It's an incredible price tag. my suggestion would be we can do some briefings offline in terms of funding sources. We're working as diligently as we can to help align resources. And I know the state board and really right up to the governor's office is in a lot of conversations about the direction. Without getting into kind of confidential discussions, governor's office has expressed strong support for the rebuilding efforts, and exactly how much funding will be available, may be made available through different funding streams is still subject to discussions.
Okay, I appreciate that. I would like to have an offline discussion relative to the commercial corridor area. I meant to ask, was that the exhibit that you had shown on your presentation? And there was an area two areas highlighted.
Yeah, that's the service area. That's primarily that commercial corridor over those two main streets there. Yeah.
So people who want to rebuild in those areas right now cannot.
No, rebuilding is, as I understand it, rebuilding is occurring. But again, they're not able to do the higher density residential housing, mixed use type projects that kind of these days are more favorable. So there is definitely a chicken and egg kind of situation here, and it's really important that this project move forward so that it can be done the right way.
So another question, and I'll let it go, but relative to the commercial corridor prior to the fire, those more dense areas, each one of those on a parcel by parcel basis had a septic system.
And yeah, septic system with septic tank and leach field, which is really that's the big one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank all of you for.
Yeah, I'd like to make a comment.
Sure.
Mark, yeah, I've witnessed these fires since 2014 and watched our Reading office and their team work feverishly to address these fires, and they continue to intense. And 2018, they pulled together the collaborative team, and it's worked well in saving lives and helping to coordinate everything and make sure that the waterways and the ground erosion and all those things are addressed to where you're not having a significant impact as it has been. There's still a lot of work to do, but I just want to commend the staff for all the work they've done over the years. I mean, this is the first year I've seen them not have to do all of the stuff that they've done. Even during the pandemic, there were lots of fires, but we had that rain this past year, and to me, I think it gave you guys some breathing room. So I'm glad that we've had that happen. The one question I did have was with the wildfire mitigation plans, what about the utility repairs to prevent some of the fires? I know it's always been mentioned that, PG&E, they didn't get to those lines in time, and one of them, needed to have been repaired, and that could have triggered the fires. Who's coordinating that effort to help ensure that the utility companies are making the necessary repairs so we don't have fires happen like this? If anyone can answer that.
Yeah, it's really the Office of Energy Infrastructure and Safety. That bill, Senate Bill 901, required the utility companies to submit annually wildfire mitigation plans that also include the vegetation management plans. And so those plans are submitted to the CPA, or now OEIS, Office of Energy Infrastructure and Safety. And when those plans are submitted, the agencies have an opportunity to comment on those plans. So we coordinate our comments, and then as part of that bill, not getting into too many details, the utility companies are required to hire a third party consultants to essentially go out and take a look at the work that they propose to ensure that work is in fact done.
Okay. Well, I thank you. I thank you, Angela and Griffin, Misty, Crystal, Brian, and Clint. I mean, it was a wonderful presentation and a tremendous amount of work you guys have done over the years, with the fires. And like I said, this past year, was the least amount of fires I've seen happen in the region. And I'm just glad that you guys finally got some relief and with all the work you've done. So thank you all very much for your presentation.
Lena, I don't know if you have any comments.
Can we go back to the, so it looks like the connections for the sewer systems to Chico, that'll take place in 2026, or did I see that wrong? It was a little bit blurry on my screen.
Yeah, at this point in time, it really depends on funding. The figure that Brian shared essentially assumes that we can put together a funding package in relatively near future. So if over the next year we can put together a funding package to support the project, then construction would commence. And the hope is that over the next 4-ish years, 5 years potentially.
Okay, well, I really look forward to that because some of my friends are sticking it out in Paradise and they're still going to Home Depot every 6 months for the bacteria they need to drop down for their business. So thank you for that.
Yeah, again, thanks everybody. Thanks to the board members for their questions and comments. It's staggering. The slide that really struck me was the Crystal put it up 57% of the Upper Feather River watershed having burned in the last 5 years, 4 years really. That's a staggering. I mean, it kind of explains why the insurance companies are a little queasy about California home policies right now. So again, thank you all. And I think every time we come to Reading, we're going to need a little update on this. It's such a big subject and stuff is changing so fast in a good way. Hopefully we won't have another fire. We'll have another wet winter here and it'll be a quiet season next year. With that, I think we need to take a bio break. Got one more agenda item. Compliance and enforcement.
Just double checking. We don't have any interested persons to comment. Bio break.
Let's do a fairly quick one here. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're ready to move on. Everybody's back. So we got. Oh, sure. Okay, so agenda item 10 is the compliance enforcement program update. Again, it's an information item only. Or status on the regional boards program. No action taken, although the board may ask questions and provide direction to staff. Following the staff presentations, interested persons will be allowed 3 minutes each to address them. So with that, I can.
Hi, good morning, Chair Bradford, members of the board. It is still morning, right? 15 minutes, okay. My name's Carrie Holmes. I'm here to provide you with an annual update on the Central Valley Water Board's compliance and enforcement program. And after the forest activities program update, I think I'll be asking Angela which delegation courses to take for next year. Unfortunately, you'll only be hearing from me for the next, hopefully less than an hour. Next slide. So this presentation is geared towards some enforcement education for board members, discussion of a few case studies and enforcement data from the 22-23 fiscal year and targets for this 23-24 year. We'll begin with resources and organization across the 3 Central Valley Regional Board offices. Then I'll discuss enforcement process and tools, progressive enforcement, 3 case studies that target our routine enforcement programs, compliance and enforcement data from last year and this year, and wrap up with some key updates to the state board's enforcement policy renewal. Next slide. Real quick shout out to Jean. Thank you so much for driving presentations today. As I'm sure you're aware by now, the Central Valley Board is the largest geographical region in the state and has 3 offices located across the region: Reading, Sacramento, and Fresno. The Central Valley region has very recently acquired Christina Shoup, which you were introduced to by Patrick earlier, our new Assistant Executive Officer in the Fresno office. And she'll be the prosecution team lead for enforcement cases emerging from the Fresno area. In addition, Dale Harvey, a supervising water resource control engineer in Fresno, has had his role somewhat expanded to assist with enforcement across additional programs in the enforcement office as Christina gets up to speed. Next slide. In order to discuss the Central Valley region's enforcement program in its entirety, I'm going to explain how compliance and enforcement staff are distributed throughout the offices. The Sacramento office is the only one that has a dedicated compliance and enforcement section, of which I'm the supervisor. I have a total of 24 staff, including 4 senior managers and 20 staff, including engineering geologists, engineers, environmental scientists, and scientific aides. The main programs I oversee, enforcement and some permitting efforts, include stormwater, cannabis, forest activities, landfills, discharge to land, and discharges to surface water. Slide. As the enforcement program manager with 3 offices, I do not supervise all enforcement staff across the region, as you saw in the previous slide. The resources for compliance and enforcement are spread throughout the region and over multiple programs. In the 3 Central Valley offices, we have approximately 138 staff performing compliance and enforcement tasks, which equates to about 57 personnel years. Of those personnel years, 25% operate out of Fresno, 21% out of Reading, and 54% in the Sacramento office. This presentation is intended to be an overview of the enforcement efforts across the offices for the compliance and enforcement program. Next slide. In addition to Central Valley staff, we are supported by the State Water Board's Office of Enforcement. All regions have liaisons, and our current liaisons are David Boyers, the Assistant Chief Counsel, along with 3 attorneys who advise us in our enforcement actions, orders, and answering day-to-day questions as they arise. Office of Enforcement also has a team called the Special Investigations Unit, and they have a variety of technical staff that assist the regional boards throughout the state with enforcement. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, I do coordinate the enforcement across programs and offices. I do my best to keep tabs on and track all enforcement, but don't assist on all enforcement actions. As you saw in the previous slides, there are a number of programs that implement permitting and enforcement within their program without compliance and enforcement section assistance. They do, however, reach out when they are looking for advice with complicated enforcement cases and to keep me involved for region-wide consistency and tracking purposes. As part of this effort, I do gather data across all programs from multiple databases bi-monthly to prepare the compliance and enforcement section of the executive officer's report, which Mindy has been a great help in assisting with as of late. Next slide. As part of the enforcement process, violations are usually identified by dischargers self-reporting in their monitoring reports required by their permits. Other common ways we identify enforcement cases is through complaints and staff inspections. I'll talk a little bit more about complaints in a minute. I track recommended enforcement cases and prioritize them with the prosecution team and the Office of Enforcement. Prioritization occurs in line with the Central Valley Water Board's strategic plan and the compliance and enforcement program priorities, which are approved by this board annually. Significant violations with impacts to water quality and overwhelming evidence are also taken into consideration as we prioritize. As I mentioned, these activities happen in the other offices and programs I do not oversee. Therefore, I've recently developed a new tracking tool for all program managers to maintain and keep updated for reporting purposes that I'm going to hopefully get out, grant supervisors access to this in the next week or so. Next slide. Central Valley Water Board staff are responsible for responding to complaints related to water quality within the Central Valley region as they are received. Approximately every 2 months, Central Valley Water Board staff can receive a total of anywhere from 40 to 100 plus complaints. They come in many fashions, which is the toughest part of the complaint tracking protocol. We get phone calls, emails, we get complaints from the Office of Emergency Services and from the Cali PA complaint database. We can usually respond to approximately 90% of these complaints, which have been investigated and closed or referred to other environmental enforcement agencies such as the counties. I'd like to acknowledge our hardworking enforcement staff that are quick to respond to complaints and investigate as needed. This can be a large unexpected workload for staff, especially when weather conditions persist, such as last year's atmospheric rivers that overwhelmed California. We had a number of complaints coming in, And our staff did an incredible job of being very responsive, as you'll see by the number of inspections that were performed in the upcoming slides. And then just a last note on this, because the complaints do come in from so many avenues, the State Water Board Special Investigation Unit, which I mentioned earlier, they're planning to develop a more robust tool for us to capture all of the complaints that come in through the various forms. It's not going to happen overnight, but something I'm very excited about. So it'll help us make sure that we're being very responsive. Next slide. The tracking spreadsheet also includes a column to indicate the Cal and virus screen percentile score. Cal and virus screen is developed and maintained by the California Office of Hazardous Health Assessment. I'm hoping all of you have heard about it before, but it helps board staff understand the role that race and ethnicity plays in the context of pollution burdens and vulnerabilities in communities we are considering taking enforcement action for due to water quality concerns. So we try to examine with Cal and virus screen the intersection of that pollution burden impacting a community, along with the characteristics of the people living in those communities. There are four major components that form the basis for environmental justice concerns. Multiple pollution sources are disproportionately concentrated in low-income communities with high minority populations. So we're really trying to focus on ensuring those folks have clean drinking and wastewater infrastructure that supports a healthy environment. Enforcement cases brought before the board if settlement cannot be reached will include time schedule orders, cleanup and abatement orders, cease and desist orders for those communities to try to first help them come into compliance as opposed to assessing a penalty right out of the gate. Next slide. There are multiple tools that we use in our progressive enforcement process. Again, we don't jump straight into an administrative civil liability or penalties when pursuing enforcement. These tools include two generalized groups, informal and formal enforcement. The most common informal enforcement actions include staff enforcement letters and notices of violation. So staff enforcement letters can include a verbal discussion in the field. They can include an email or a simple letter to a discharger. And a notice of a violation is very similar in the context that we provide it. It just says notice of violation at the top, which can be a little more impactful for dischargers that were wanting to comply. Formal enforcement actions include 13260 orders, which are when we request a report of waste discharge from a discharger that either does not have a regional board permit or has a permit that needs updating due to their facility and operational changes. 13267 orders. We request technical reports if information is necessary that is not stated in their current permit. 13308 orders or time schedule orders. These are necessary when we're looking for a formal schedule to bring a discharger back into compliance with their current permit. Cleanup and abatement orders may be issued to any dischargers who have discharge based in violation of their permit. Want to bring them back into compliance. Cease and desist orders are often issued to dischargers with chronic non-compliance problems. These problems are rarely amenable to a short-term solution and often include extensive capital improvements or operational changes. And then lastly, we have administrative civil liabilities. These are for certain violations of current existing permits and violation of the laws. Again, those can be in the order of cleanup and abatement order, cease and desist, or an ACL, which is a penalty. Next slide. The Central Valley Regional Board recently developed a notice of violation template, which is now being utilized by all of our programs. It's been a success in that it has created consistency across the programs in all three offices, as well as better organized for dischargers to be able to understand exactly what they're violating within the water code or the regulations. One of the major change of note previous notices is that there is a table right up at the top of the notice of violation that summarizes the violations, similar to kind of how you would summarize violations for a, well, I think Patrick said a parking ticket, because it's very clear right up front what they did. The rest of the notice of violation has a lot of information. You can get lost very quickly. So there's a screenshot there of a recent notice. Next slide. In case you're not aware, I want to talk a little bit about mandatory minimum penalties. They're the most common type of administrative civil liabilities that we issue. They're also commonly known as MMPs. You'll hear me say that a bit later, so that's what I'm referring to. They're issued to NPDES dischargers, so dischargers that discharge to a surface water. The assessment of MMPs are $3,000 per effluent limit violation, and staff strive to assess those penalties within 18 months of our discovering those violations have occurred. There are two groups of violations, serious and non-serious. Serious violations include exceedances in excess of 40% for group 1 pollutants. I've listed a couple of those pollutants here: biological, oxygen, and nutrients, detergents. And then 20% for group 2 pollutants, which include inorganics, organics, and all metals, other metals. Another MMP that you can get is a serious violation when a self-monitoring report is submitted more than 30 days late. So you'll be assessed a $30,000 penalty for each 30 days that it's late. All other exceedances of effluent limitations are considered non-serious, and we typically don't assess the penalty. Next slide. So administrative civil liabilities can be settled in a number of ways. The discharger can pay the penalty and the matter will be resolved. In addition, alternatives to the assessment of the liability, such as compliance projects, supplemental environmental projects, and enhanced compliance actions are available, but they require standards for the approval of those alternatives to ensure they provide the expected benefits and that they comply with the state water board's enforcement policy. Water boards do not have discretion in assessing some penalties such as MMPs that I just discussed. However, the California Water Code does provide an alternative to assessing MMPs against public treatment works that serves a small community. Under this alternative, the regional board can allow the discharger to spend an amount equivalent to the penalty towards a compliance project that is designed specifically to correct the violations that they had just accrued. In addition to a reduction of payment of the penalty, a settlement can result in the permanent suspension of a portion of the liability when the discharger voluntarily agrees to fund a supplemental environmental project. Supplemental environmental project, or SEP, it's commonly referred to, is an environmentally beneficial project that a discharger voluntarily agrees to undertake in settlement of the action. and to offset a portion of the penalty. And lastly, enhanced compliance actions are projects that enable a discharger to make capital or operational improvements beyond those required by law and are separate from projects designed merely to bring a discharger back into compliance with the violations they had that's been assessed. Next slide. Now I'll take you through three cases where settlement occurred and ACL's penalties were imposed. So the first one is the city of Colusa wastewater treatment plant. They had 47 total coliform exceedances. That's a lot. Typically, we see coliform exceedances from time to time. You expect that in wastewater treatment plants for a variety of reasons, but they were having a really hard time controlling them. So basically, to offset part of their penalty costs, they did two compliance projects based on two different assessments of mandatory minimum penalties. The first one is the top right corner, the picture that shows that brown shed there. They basically just enclosed their ultraviolet channel disinfection system so that you didn't get any, basically there's a lot of birds out there, so it's easy to get non-human sources of coliform entering their channels. That was completed in March 2022. And then the most recent one is that they lined their UV channels with stainless steel. This is pretty common. A lot of the original wastewater treatment plants that incorporated UV technology for disinfection started with lining channels with concrete, and how they would wash the channels to try to get rid of issues with regrowth is they would power wash them, which creates kind of a porous concrete, which is the bacteria love. So the regrowth was getting pretty bad. So a lot of our facilities are lining their channels with stainless steel. The city of Colusa, being a disadvantaged community, was able to use most of their liability to do this effort. We have other projects across the state that are larger dischargers that are undergoing the same exact types of EMPs that they're paying for out of pocket. Next slide. We went backwards. 16 maybe? Yeah. So this is a case study for the city of Colfax where we had a discharger basically noticing that there was going to be a problem, taking corrective action on their own. And it was great to see that the water boards didn't have to intervene and go through an administrative civil liability, and they were able to correct a large portion of the problem on their own. This happened last year due to the atmospheric rivers. Dischargers knew that they were going to get a very heavy influx of water. So as part of their kind of preventative measures, they're typically going to try to empty ponds as much as they can before those wet weather events occur. In their case, they had some issues controlling their pH. So they didn't want to discharge from their pond because they didn't want to violate that portion of their order. That's been cleared up luckily for this year, fingers crossed. But what they did was they knew they were going to have more water than they could handle based on their water balance, and that they were going to overtop their ponds. So in order to try to protect the ponds from damage and to protect water quality and not have this pond water overflow into surface water, they created a bypass. That's where the red arrow is, or that red squiggly arrow. And they implemented additional temporary treatment at that location, which included filtration, chlorination, and dechlorination, so that they were minimizing the impact of that discharge to the receiving waters. So since then, they've made some repairs to the chemical dosing system for the pH, as well as increased their pumping capacity from pond 3 to the wastewater treatment plant, which would have saved them this year. Next slide. So Central Valley Water Board staff, they have a slightly different process for settling most of our construction stormwater cases, which we call compressed ACLs. Something that the Central Valley Water Board Compliance and Enforcement Program kind of dreamed up a couple of years ago under my predecessor. Basically, it's an abbreviated version of a full ACL, which can be very time intensive to draft and work with dischargers to settle and negotiate. So these compressed ACLs, they still go through the enforcement policy steps using the same factors, but basically the justification write-up is a lot less need for the work, because stormwater is a very it's a program that a picture tells 1,000,000 words, not 1,000 words. So it's pretty easy to have conversations with dischargers to settle when we have photographic evidence and out to the site. So here's a couple of just different differences between the compressed and full ACL. So compressed ACL, relatively short duration of violations, but severe enough to warrant a penalty. Whereas the full ACL would be long-term violations, got a discharger you've been working with for a long time to get back into compliance. The compressed ACL is designed to settle. Full ACLs can settle, but will likely be contested. I wouldn't say will likely. We do a pretty good job of settling. Most dischargers would like to work with us these days, which is why you don't see enforcement cases, and myself included, before you all the time. But that's a good thing, because it's incredibly less resource intensive. And then compressed ACLs only include violations that are pretty much indisputable. Like I said, they have the photographic evidence. So yeah, both use the enforcement policy to calculate the penalty. And then, so you see at the bottom, months of effort. It says we've done up to 6 in a year for compressed. Actually, last year we did 7. But the full ACLs, depending on the volume of information and evidence, can take much longer than that, and typically take more of our Office of Enforcement's attorney assistance as well. Next slide. So when construction stormwater sites are inspected, they're not inspected with the intention necessarily of going to enforcement. The staff that we have out in the field, especially on construction sites, really is the best deterrent for violations of water quality. Enforcement depends on a lot on the discharger's initial efforts to comply, and then the discharger's response to our inspections. So first we'll go out, identify a site that we should inspect based on a lack of BMPs or a complaint. And so the first interaction with the water board staff is typically a verbal warning, discussion, email. Like I said, not trying to penalize them right off the bat, but hey, it looks like you need some BMPs out here and you know better. Then we'll go out after we gave that warning to a follow-up inspection. If they haven't corrected the issues, we'll typically go to a notice of violation. And then we usually wait for a fairly large rain event to go back out again if needed. And if they have continued issues, that's when we'll really start the compressed ACL. So it's crucial for these compressed ACLs to organize all the evidence, including photos that are date stamped. Oh, you can go forward, Jean. You were right. Photos that are date stamped for evidence, water board inspection reports, dischargers' responses to those inspections, documentation of if they have a qualified stormwater pollution protection plan practitioner or developer report on site that can help us as well. So from that evidence, we decide what violations to include, download rainfall data to confirm a large storm event occurred at the site, determine a start and end date for violations, which we usually end up negotiating with the dischargers because it's not exact. And then start calculating using the penalty calculation methodology and the enforcement policy. Next. So yeah, this year we did 6 compressed ACLs for construction sites. These are really good to get out on the street very quickly because construction's happening everywhere very quickly, especially in California. And when contractors see their neighbors getting violations, warnings, it really motivates them to get some PMPs in place and try to control some of that runoff. The penalties range from 35,000 to 194,000 this year. It's not a huge amount. The sad part is the economic benefit range. They really are only saving on delayed costs. If they would have just implemented the BMPs to begin with, they would be saving themselves quite a bit of money. The supplemental environmental project. Typically, we don't do these as part of these ACLs for stormwater sites, but this particular site we had this year that we had an ACL on up in Grass Valley, they really did kind of a number to an area near a creek, and the residents got involved and worked together with the contractor to get a supplemental environmental project together because they really wanted to see the area fixed and have some corrective action as opposed to just putting money into the cleanup and abatement account, which is where it would have gone if they had just paid us. So I'm excited to see that project. Should be starting construction next year. Most common violations are discharge without implementing best available technology, best control technology, and the most common violations, just no erosion control and best management practices in the area. Next slide. So now we'll discuss how targets are established for the compliance and enforcement program. For each of the programs listed, an inspection target or goal is established each fiscal year. These are basically enforcement's only targets. We don't have targets as of today for things like notices of violations or ACLs that we're going to issue, but State Board is working on some type of formula to come up with targets. I think it's a little bit difficult and has been just because enforcement is kind of all over and you never really know what you're going to get, especially with the weather events that we have in California. But it'll be interesting. So for now, these are just inspections based on the program. We did very well this year. So the MPDS program, which are typically POTWs, major and minor facilities. The major facilities are larger than 1 MGD. The only difference, we made our major target, minor facilities. We did not make it to one of the facilities we planned, but that's because we made it to a couple other facilities that are enrolled under our general order, which don't technically count for some of these metrics. Waste discharge to land, wastewater, we had expected to do 111. We did 195 in large part due to the atmospheric rivers and all the rain we had this year. Our staff were in the field the majority of the time. Same with landfills and other. The other are typically composting sites, which are popping up more and more throughout the Central Valley because of it's Senate Bill 1383, which is trying to eliminate compost from landfills. So they're doing offsite composting. A lot of those that are in the other category with good permitting effort ahead of us there. MPDS stormwater, so construction, industrial, same thing, 118, 156% of our targets approximately. Again, a lot of those are based on the fact that we had such a large rainfall year. MS4, we typically don't have a target, but we did do 52 quote unquote inspections. I think some of those entail report reviews because we're very limited on MS4 resources. So those kind of combine not only in the field inspections, but also report reviews that are coming in. And then other programs, forest activities and confined animals. I think forest activities was pretty close. I think you saw from their presentation earlier that with all the rainfall, it may have helped us for inspections. Some of the programs within their program, not so much, because I'm sure some of those access roads were washed out and it was probably not very safe to be out there. And then confined animals made about 72% of the target of inspections for this year. Okay, next slide. So the inspection targets for this coming year, they haven't changed drastically. I will note that the MPDS major facilities has increased quite a bit, up to 26. Most of those are handled out of the Rancho Cordova office. So they have their hands there. And then the other major change I would say is in stormwater. The construction and industrial targets have changed. We've had a pretty set target over the years, but this year we tried to play around with, I think it was a 10% of our overall enrollees. And so we kind of flipped how many construction versus industrial inspections we conduct. And then the others are all pretty similar. Next slide. I don't know a whole lot about site cleanup because I don't have them under my umbrella, but these are their inspection targets, looking at those for their Department of Defense sites, the active remediation, site cleanup sites that are going to be closed, UST sites that are remediated and closed. These targets are all very similar to what have been expressed over the other years that I've been in this position. Next slide. So I know I didn't discuss the details of the state board's enforcement policy and how specifically those penalties are calculated. I am happy to do that or have an Office of Enforcement attorney or liaison come in and do a separate presentation. It would be an hour plus and there'd be lots of questions. But I did want to give you a little bit of an update from the 2017 enforcement policy to this 2023 proposed enforcement policy. State board's currently working on response to comments for the changes, and they expect to go to their board in December, hopefully to have it adopted at the end of this year. So a few of the changes under prioritization and communication. I think all of our regional boards and state boards have prioritized environmental justice and disadvantaged communities for evaluation when doing a lot of our water quality work, including enforcement. They've also added some language about the California Native American tribes and how we work together with them more closely. The penalty calculation methodology, major changes. So really taking into account the ability to pay prior to the final liability amount that we propose. It's been more and more of an issue in certain programs, specifically, I believe, confined animals. We don't now consider alleged violations of determining our history factor. There's a factor, a number that you use. In the past, it's been a little bit kind of a gray area. If we look at violations that are alleged but not documented through a whole ACL process. So we're only looking at those violations that have been agreed upon by both the Central Valley Water Board and the discharger. The history of violations factor, there used to be an option to have it be less than 1. Now it's going to be above 1. That's the minimum. Clarify that not taking action to correct a violation that has been identified may be relevant to both cleanup and cooperation and culpability. In the past, not taking an action to correct a violation used to be either looked at in cleanup and cooperation or the culpability factor. Now we're gonna be able to discuss that their inability to act within 2 of the factors. Next slide. Settlement wise, eligibility for compliance projects is determined at the date of adoption of the ACL order. That's just a clarification that when we consider a compliance project, they have to be considered a disadvantaged community. So we have to run through some statistics to make sure they meet the criteria, and it fluctuates very regularly. So now we're going to look at that eligibility at the date of the adoption of the order, as opposed to before the adoption. Corrective action projects that would allow suspending 50% of liability for violations. For violations of a cleanup order conditioned or returning to compliance with the order. So this is a new type of project. I know I went over the compliance project, supplemental environmental project, and enhanced compliance project earlier. This is a new type of proposed project that they would like to implement in the new enforcement policy. So it's had a lot of comments. I'm not sure if it's going to actually make it through, but the idea is that these corrective action projects would allow suspending up to 50% of the penalty for violations of an existing cleanup order so that they can return to compliance with that order. A little redundant, but we'll see how that goes. Process and procedures, clarify that MMPs for stormwater may take longer to address than 18 months. That doesn't really apply to the Central Valley region. That's for the stormwater general order, and we, the Central Valley, do not currently have any TMDLs written in for our region, and that's what those MMPs would be assessed on, maybe in the future. And then the last thing, and a very important thing, add template hearing procedures for ACL hearings to standardize the process across the state. That was a pretty big addition. Next slide. Oh, that's all. So that's just a little bit of information about compliance enforcement. Like I said, next year I think I'm going to bring a whole team. Very good idea. You guys did. But again, they're out in the field working very hard, getting those inspection reports written up. So appreciate your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have. And if I can't, I'll get back to you.
All right, I guess we had a theme for today's meeting, and that's
little bit of information for each item. So thank you. I appreciate that overview. Always helpful to understand sort of the inner workings programs. I have some questions. Obviously, the overall purpose of enforcement, obviously, not to put words in, it's compliance, not punishment, right? And so, to that end, of the various enforcement categories that I saw out there, pretty high degree of technical sophistication by those types of folks, those permittees. Curious to know the enforcement efforts maybe that are more commonly seen with small businesses. You see much on that side, and I'm not sure which program that would be. And I have some follow-ups, but maybe that first question that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. We're definitely a compliance first region. I think every region in our state operates a little differently based on the types of programs their enforcement really has to participate in. But for example, under the industrial general permit, we've got a lot of smaller dischargers, and our intent at Central Valley is to first go in and work with them and try to get them educated first and foremost, get them enrolled if they're not. It's a learning process. There's a lot of coaching and hand holding that we definitely do. It's really the dischargers that know better, the larger ones that were a little more aggressive in penalizing, because they do have the resources, they do have the capabilities and the technical knowledge.
Yeah, that's helpful, because that's certainly the way I think about it too. Maybe a graduated scale, a sliding scale of sorts, as it relates to these folks, the smaller business types. I'm just wondering, do we also provide? It's great to hear about the outreach, because that's one of my questions relative to, obviously in advance, if we're doing any education and outreach efforts to trade organizations or groups that would tend to have more of these types of folks, so as to not have necessarily an enforcement issue, but try to inform considerably ahead of time, but understanding that you do have to handhold even if there is an enforcement action. Have you noticed, I mean, do we offer that outreach, and I want to take your word, hand holding, in various languages? For example, is English as a second language a barrier to compliance or communicating an understanding of a regulatory program?
Yeah, I think we've really improved on that over the last couple of years. It has been in the past, but we do have other groups that we work with that work on providing bilingual communication handouts, informational items, and education pamphlets, such as for with stormwater, the group CASQUA that we work with, and a lot of our staff also participate in those CASQUA meetings that are held annually, and then there are more along the way over the year, but the major ones on an annual basis. And a lot of our Central Valley Water Board stormwater staff provide presentations at those meetings. So we're doing better there, but I haven't had a whole lot of feedback from my staff that it's been a huge issue.
I did want to add a bit more, if I could, Nick. Often it's providing a link between the discharger and qualified practitioners to make sure they're engaging those staff. They, as part of the application process, they need to engage them, but also they can work with them to identify issues on the site and identify more cost-effective measures sometimes to navigate the discharge requirements. But oftentimes they, very unfamiliar dischargers may need to have that, hey, you need to reach out to a professional to assist you in this project, or re-engage them sometimes if they initially had a professional develop a plan, then lost contact with them to help them get into compliance again.
So on that was a good point, because I was going to touch on the standardization of the notices of violation. I like that certainly, and in this context, you know, are we, so you're saying we connect discharges that kind of fall in this category on the less sophisticated scale, if you will. Do we have, how does that work? I mean, there are consultants providing obviously the services to kind of be a guide for them. Is there like a list? How do we determine we're recommending as an independent private consultant that has nothing to do with the water board to assist somebody?
The organization that Carrie mentioned, CASCA, maintains a list of qualified persons that can be reached out to and assist with the technical expertise to fix the issues for stormwater.
Yeah, that being said, it's not ironed out. So qualified practitioners have been a very high level discussion as we're renewing through the state board, both the construction general permit and the industrial general permit. Because a lot of times it's not the discharger who should be getting these violations. It's the qualified practitioner who's not following the practices. And so we're looking at starting to implement some controls either through our permits or another vehicle to make sure that dischargers are getting the best practitioners out there that are not going to get them in trouble with the requirements.
And I would add for context, you know, IGP is exactly where I'd go to too. And I think that the big areas of interface with kind of small businesses are farms, cannabis operations, but both of those are handled through separate enforcement mechanisms. Dairies also, but handled through a separate kind of regulatory program. So within Carrie's program, I think the small businesses are largely regulated by industrial stormwater permits. And there was that requirement that kicked in a couple of years ago. I'm bad at quoting which Senate or Assembly bills it was, but essentially all to get your business license, you have to show that you've got a stormwater permit. And the stormwater permit is developed in a very sensitive process at the state water board, and that those permits, construction, industrial, have requirements that you engage with certified professional stormwater practitioners to develop your stormwater management plan. So I think that's the biggest area where we interface with small businesses. Looking over at the kind of portfolio of enforcement actions that we have, and I specifically asked Carrie, got to provide some case studies because I do approve those settlements on behalf of the board. So I'd like to see kind of what you're seeing on a day-to-day basis. We do the write-ups in the executive officer's report. And if there's anything really controversial, I'll bring it to the board and we'll hammer it out there. But you haven't seen a lot of industrial stormwater ACL like fines because largely it is, you know, the inspection staff who operate under Carrie's direction. They go in there and they talk to this business and say, well, you really have to get this covered. You really probably should have a retention pond so that your stormwater isn't running off here. And here's the website that you can go to find a list of, you know, dozens of certified practitioners in your area. The conversation that Carrie has with the state board folks is exactly what she kind of described. There are some practitioners who aren't doing the best by their clients. And so the conversation with the Office of Enforcement and the State Water Board is how do we beef up those requirements for stormwater practitioners? Because there is a certification program that the State Board runs to kind of make sure that they're up to par. But when we see it's clearly like the consultant has screwed up, you know, that retention pond is way undersized, or you didn't do what you're supposed to do when you know, told the small business how to grade this property so stormwater isn't running off, how the berms have to be positioned, things like that. It has almost never resulted in a fine. Instead, we kind of work to engage with the practitioner and say, what the heck are you doing here? There have been, you know, Office of Enforcement has engaged in not so friendly discussions with those firms that are providing not good advice to clients, and have even pursued, you know, against firms that are using less than reputable sampling laboratories. Because again, one of the big requirements and one of the things that's up for debate at the State Water Board is how and when should you sample the stormwater runoff from your site. You know, it's a little squishy right now. And I think that, you know, the Office of Enforcement and the stormwater team of the State Board intends to beef that up. And when they beef that up, to really provide in multiple languages in plain English, this is what you have to do as a small business. You gotta, I mean, it's kind of squishy in terms of like when you have to sample for the first rainfall event. It's, you know, I think our team and a good practitioner would know. But you know, the small business person might not know. So that's something that they are working very diligently on clarifying, putting it in black and white, having training modules out there that'll help make those decisions. And the flip side of that is when you go through that effort to make it absolutely crystal clear about what your obligations are, then you can bring the hammer a little harder when those obligations aren't followed. So I think that's the big picture, but I you know, completely concur with Carrie when you're talking small business interface with the board and specifically the programs that fall under Carrie's supervision. IGP and industrial general permit, stormwater is really what rises to the top. Composting is kind of an odd one. They've got some small businesses out there. It's one of the reasons we're doing a lot of inspections. As Carrie mentioned, you know, Cal Recycle is under diversion requirements that are exceptional. You know, it's why if you live in the Sacramento area, you've been reminded 1,000 times. You know, your organics go in a separate bin. That's really the ultimate goal there, but that stuff has to go somewhere, and it's going to these composting operations, some of which were set up a little not good as they should have been. You know, kind of the commercial need was there, and they set up shop, started taking the materials, and didn't quite have the infrastructure ready to make sure that there weren't neighbor complaints or there weren't water quality violations. So, but those are the big areas that Carrie's team interfaces with.
Yeah, I appreciate that. You know, obviously, you know, that the goal is for people to comply. We obviously are assessing threats to water quality, and I know for small business owners, they might have resources for their issues to bubble up here. I want to make sure that we're doing everything possible, obviously, to facilitate that compliance at the entry level, and that education happens, because their success is our success, certainly, and I'm not interested in putting people out of business if they are innocently uninformed, shall we say. So I appreciate that. And I would say relative to the requirements associated with business licenses, it's unfortunate, I think, to the degree there's a disconnect between government agencies, especially when you're a small business owner and government's one thing. Government's not one thing, it's a million different things, and they don't understand that. And to the degree that municipalities that issue these business licenses are informed enough, again, resource issue how we do that, but for them to be that front line and say, oh, you're going to need to comply with regional board permitting requirements. Oh, and here's a list of qualified consultants, so as not to say when somebody goes to the counter, oh, you need to go see somebody else.
No, I actually think it's been pretty solid, to be honest. I think in our region we saw a little bit of a bump, fairly significant bump, but you know, regions like LA, you know, there was just a surge, thousands of these. I mean, and I do think it encouraged, it forced, I'll say not encouraged, but it forced collaboration between the counties and local governments and the water boards, because, you know, the counties had to say, well, wait, as part of your business license, what is this thing that I have to know about? You know, what is this license from the water board that they have to show me in order for me to issue that component? So there's a lot of outreach happened with local government. I think it was a good bill. I mean, honestly, I think it was a good bill. It came with a little bit of resources, not quite as much as we would have liked, but it came with a little bit of resources to implement on our end too. And I think it's having an effect. I think it's also having an effect on water quality.
All right, thanks for all that. Denise or Elena, do you have any questions, comments?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah, I just had a couple of comments. Thank you very much for your presentation, Carrie. I was glad to hear about the compressed ACLs designed to help reduce the full ACLs. I noticed over the past couple of years, we've not had a lot of ACLs coming before. So obviously that's working, and that's good to know that things are being handled in-house versus having to bring it before the board. And then also just to comment on the enforcement prioritization for the environmental justice disadvantaged communities and the native tribes. It's also important that we make sure that their compliance is happening in those communities that are impacted from the discharges. So giving some prioritization to those areas goes a long way in helping to ensure that those communities are, the impact is not as significant. So I appreciate it, and the presentation was well done. So thank you very much.
No, thank you, Denise. And I will say, my conversations with Carrie and JJ on enforcement. One of the keystones is kind of a deterrence theory. I think it's kind of what we try and develop at the regional board, where you want to make sure that if you're really trying to deter something, that you have measures that are certain, swift, and severe, fair, depending on how you characterize it. And I think certainty is a big component there. What we were seeing in the past was that when we tied up staff for a hearing in front of the regional board, which we absolutely will do when circumstances warrant, it meant that we could not get to as many cases. And so the certainty that if you violate, and kind of through progressive enforcement, you miss one, you miss two, strike three, you deserve an ACL. That there's some certainty that process will be carried through. The compressed ACL helps us deliver on that certainty that you will get a financial penalty if you screwed up once, twice, three times and had deleterious effects on water quality. And I think that certainty wasn't quite there when we invest a lot of resources in a hearing before the board, because to be frank, there's some cases that we had to drop, and cases that we would have liked to prioritize that we had to drop just because there wasn't enough resources out there. So it was kind of in that thinking that we did the compressed ACL policy. I think Carrie has been incredible in helping her team talk with the Office of Enforcement about that type of prioritization. What is deserving of a penalty? Taking a real close look at the evidence that we gathered. I will say, just as kind of a personal note on the board's behalf, I've been insisting whenever I sign something to see the inspection reports and all the background materials before I sign off on these compressed ACLs even. And the work that's done, the groundwork that's done by her staff is just extraordinary. Really good work, really good plain English. We contacted so on such a time. We told them your silt fencing was defective in this area. Here is the memo we gave them. Here's a time we talked to them. We came back on a certain date. Here's the water quality sample. We gave them the warning. We said, we're coming back when it's raining. And, when it's a compressed ACL, it's three strikes. They definitely had every chance in the world to comply and missed out on it. And then, I think that we have seen, that makes waves within the industry too. That the regional board is serious. They're getting to violations in the upper watersheds and lower watersheds in Northern California, or the northern part of the region, southern part of the region. We are not going to roll the dice and play the game of not putting our BMPs out there at the start of the rainy season. Last year we found out, reminded everybody it does rain in California. You got to take this stuff seriously. And I think Carrie's team did a wonderful job of staying on top of that. So again, my appreciation to the enforcement team on that.
Yeah, I think that, since I've been on the board, this has been tremendous improvements in enforcement. So it's making a significant difference. So I see the changes that have been made, and the fact that you're getting more people to respond with the notice of violations and without having to do so many cease and desist and bring the ACLs before the board, and the other improvements that have been made, I think is commendable, and it hopefully reduces some of your workload, and is certainly making it better for compliance overall. So I appreciate the work that all of you are doing there.
Well, and Denise, I just wanted to mention, since you brought up environmental justice and disadvantaged communities, we're going to start seeing more and more issues arise that need fixing in these communities that need funding. And you brought up funding through DFA earlier, and I've been contacting them more and more regularly to try to work with them. That's another part of the assistance role that we play that compliance and enforcement may not get a whole lot of credit for, but we're constantly working with them and the dischargers to get applications submitted and CEQA complete and that sort of thing, so they can get the funding once we identify the issues.
Thank you, Carrie.
Yeah, Carrie, I certainly appreciate you and what you just said. That to me, that's very, very important. That means that the communities are not being ignored, but the enforcement is there on their side to ensure that you're protecting the communities, the water quality, and all of that. I think is very important that the communities not be ignored, and not to say that they have been ignored, but the extra prioritization, I think, is showing a good effort in ensuring that those communities, when the impacts are there, you're on top of it and making sure that the discharges are in compliance. So I'm really glad to see that. Thank you so much.
I just had one comment or question, I guess, on that case study number 2 for Colfax, when we had that incredible winter and they had some violations technically, but I think the slide showed they did corrective action projects, right? And then was there a penalty on top of that? I don't think it showed. Or did, I mean, because it was so unusual, the circumstances, and they corrected it.
Right. So it's interesting. There was no penalty. If they would have discharged and reduced the level of that pond 3 before the storms hit, there would have been a penalty because the pH was 0.1 out of range. They're having a little difficulty controlling it. So as opposed to having those penalties come in, they took the initiative to set up a temporary treatment system and still be able to discharge and not violate their permit requirements.
I
Flexibility in our program around situations like that. So thank you.
Yeah, I think what was good about Colfax is that they were proactive, and I think Karen made reference to that they were proactive, and it could have been a far worse situation had they not taken the initiative to do what they did. And I'm just curious to know if we have any others out there that are proactive and heading off something that could have a significant impact.
I'll say proactive, but with a stern nudge from the compliance team that helped with that proactivity.
Yeah.
And Carrie, having worked in the NPDS program for a while, I think can really help on say, here's the bookends to the type of compliance that you can try to make it work.
Thanks again, Carrie. Very nice presentation.
Thank you.
We're about ready to wrap up here. We had agenda item 11 got moved to the consent calendar, and then we already dealt with agenda item 12, which was the Premier Resource Management. So with that, adjourn the meeting. The next meeting is on December 14th and 15th, correct? Rancho Cordova.
We don't have a closed session today?
No closed session today.
Wow.
Just about done. I will note that for the December 14th, 15th board meeting, we will be scheduling a significant amount of time with the Office of Public Participation to go through shared expectations, kind of a board retreat as we head into some difficult decisions for the board over the upcoming couple of years. Always difficult decisions, but some unusually consequential for the Central Valley on a whole. And probably going to have a holiday celebration as well. So mark your calendars for that. And that's it from me for today.
Okay, one quick question before we dismiss Mark. Steve is no longer with us, but who would we contact should we have issues with our computers and logging on? I had a problem this morning, but who would, Gene, is he the contact?
Oh, you mean Bob, not Steve.
I'm sorry, I don't know why I'm saying, yeah, Bob Chow.
I'm trying to think of Steve. So I think Roberto can still help out a little bit with issues, and I think next time maybe we'll check in the day before just to make sure that there's compliance issues. We are switching, and Kevin is here actually providing some support. Kevin Heidemann, Bob's boss when Bob was still around. But the IT ticket address is how a lot of those will be resolved now. Go to, I believe it's what, Info5 or R5 help, R5 help for all the board members. If you have IT needs, R5 help at waterboards.ca.gov. Send that an email and it will go to the IT team. And somebody from the IT team will address your concern as quick as they're able to.
Okay. Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Patrick.
Hopefully for the December meeting, we'll have 1 or 2 new board members that can also go through the orientation. Forward to that. Okay, with that, I think we're adjourned. Thank you. Thanks for ever putting us in this beautiful space.
Yeah,
All
and-
right.
and
Thanks,
welcome to
everybody.
the first meeting, your official
Yes.
first meeting. Good to have you part of the team. Thank you.
It's good to be here.